Hello. Hi, all. Can everyone hear me okay? Lovely. We are in this chamber rather than our usual meeting room, so you're a lot further away than I'm used to, including the rest of my committee members, who I feel like are suddenly miles away. I'll run through very quickly the fire evacuation procedures and a couple of other housekeeping things. So there are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs unless otherwise instructed and meet in the War Memorial Park. Members, please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and same goes for the members of the public. Please also switch your phones off and or turn them to silent. And when you are speaking, please could use the microphones. You'll watch some of the councillors come and speak first, so you'll hopefully be able to follow and copy them. If you've got any problems, please just ask. But there's a button on the microphones that you have to press to be able to speak. With that done, do we need to move minutes of the last meeting first? No, apologies, here we go. So we've had replacements, substitutions today from Councillor Miller, who's been replaced by Councillor Vox. Councillor Oborne is being replaced by Councillor Kay Watts. Are there any other apologies for absence or substitutions from the committee? Lovely, thank you. And are there any declarations of interest that anyone on the committee needs to make? Councillor Chapman? Lovely, thank you. Any other declarations of interest from the committee? We'll move on to passing the minutes of the last meeting, held on the 5th of June. Our committee agreed that the minutes of the meeting, held on the 5th of June 2025, are an accurate record. So, do I need a proposer and a seconder for those, Ellen?
No.
Lovely. So now we move on to the main business, and it is, of course, why most of you are here today. The local plan updated proposed spatial strategy, which I believe will now be introduced by one of the officers leading on this.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I introduce it? With your permission, thank you very much. So I think it's fair to say that this is a meeting that none of us wanted to hold about a draft spatial strategy that none of us wanted to produce. As we all know, we've made significant progress in updating our local plan last year, even going as far as starting preparations for the final Regulation 19 consultation. However, the publication by the government of yet another new set of draft planning rules last December forced us to go back a few stages in our plan making process, and the result is the draft spatial strategy that we see before us this evening. This new spatial strategy reflects the fact that the government has set us a much higher housing number. Our housing target is increased from around 830 new homes a year under the old rules to a current figure of approximately 1,150. That's a significant increase, I think, in anyone's books. And it's an increase that we challenge robustly via our responses to the government's consultation on the subject, by lobbying through our local MPs, and at the meetings that we actually held ourselves with ministers. The government listened to our representations, but decided to press on with its changes anyway. There'll be plenty of people in this room who remain angry with the government for ignoring our arguments for a lower housing number, and there'll be plenty who support what the government has done. But we're not here tonight to debate the rights or wrongs of the government's house building policy. We're here this evening because we agree that our borough needs to retain as much control as possible over development in our area, because we want Basingstoke and Dean, and whatever new unitary authority replaces it, to continue to thrive long into the future. In reality, this means that we need to crack on with updating our local plan and making the most of the poor hand that we've been dealt by the planning system. Delaying the plan or trying to argue without any justification that we should go for a lower housing number won't benefit anyone except the speculative developers who want to turn a quick profit at our expense. Getting the updated plan back to this stage has involved making a lot of tough decisions. In particular, we've been forced to allocate extra sites that we've previously been able to resist including. And I know that will cause a lot of frustration for many people in this room and in our borough as a whole. But despite these challenges, we've worked hard to create a draft spatial strategy that seeks to balance the competing requirements on our precious landscapes, our waterways and rural settlements, a local plan that hopefully maximises development on brownfield land, which is a principle that's always had cross-group support, and also a draft spatial strategy that helps to ensure that extra housing is well supported by new infrastructure. We've got just over a year to get this plan submitted to an inspector. If we miss the December 2026 deadline, we'll be forced to navigate a new planning system. Nobody knows the details of this, but everybody expects that it will give local authorities like us even less of a say over the local plan making process. We owe it to our residents not to miss this deadline. With that in mind, I'm keen to hear your views this evening on the proposed site allocations and strategies so that we can incorporate your thoughts into the next draft and go back to public consultation before the end of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, actually, for the officer who was adjusted to you before.
Thank you, Chair. So the Chair has asked me if I would provide for you a factual sort of outline of the process from here. So as Councillor Konechko has just referred, the Council undertook a full draft plan consultation in early 2024 before those revisions were made to the National Planning Policy Framework and then the new local housing need figure. So national policy requires that we meet that new housing target in full, which means it's been necessary to carry out a further call for sites and consider how we might meet that target. So that's led us to propose a focused consultation only on the spatial strategy, which is our approach to setting out what type of development will take place and where, and the details of the proposed sites to be allocated for new homes and employment space. Of those sites which we are now proposing be allocated for homes, there are only two, the one at Washwater and the other at Mortimer, that have not previously been considered by a scrutiny committee. So the committee has previously scrutinised all of the other sites, even those that were not taken forward in the 2024 draft plan for Regulation 18 consultation. So just to assist the committee in understanding next steps, your discussion this evening will look at both the strategy and the allocations and identify any recommendations you wish to make to Cabinet on those new elements that have not previously been considered. They will then be considered by Cabinet together with our professional officer advice, and should the Cabinet agree to this focused consultation, it will take place later this year and be supported by other evidence that will be published alongside it. All the representations that we then receive will be considered, and the comments that have been received on the other sections of the plan in the previous Regulation 18 consultation remain under consideration. They will inform changes to be made, which will all be brought together and consulted upon mid-2026 at what's called Regulation 19 stage. So just to clarify that for you, the Regulation 19 stage consultation is where representations are sought on whether the plan is sound and legally compliant. Those are the tests that are set out. So to be found sound, our local plan needs to be consistent with national policy and positively prepared, contain an appropriate strategy which takes account of reasonable alternatives and is based on proportionate evidence. It also needs to be deliverable over the plan period, and we're required to work collaboratively with neighbouring authorities through the duty to cooperate. The integrated impact assessment considers those reasonable alternatives. It's at Appendix 1 of your papers, as well as whether the strategy is appropriate based on several objectives to be delivered. And that integrated impact assessment informs the plan. It's updated as the plan progresses. So representatives at Regulation 19 stage can request they're heard by the inspector. So the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. They may choose to take part in any oral examination hearings, and the inspector will be looking to the planning team to justify the approach the council has taken. A decision whether to proceed to Regulation 19 consultation will be scrutinised and will be a decision for full council to make. I appreciate that's a step ahead, Chair, of the process, but you felt it would be helpful to explain that for the committee and people in the public gallery. So I hope that's been helpful.
Thank you, Jenny. So yeah, just to reiterate, obviously I know there's a lot of speakers today, previous meetings of this committee and its former form have considered a whole draft local plan to extend to policy matters well beyond site allocations. Understandably, there was a need to reconvene to consider all aspects, and given the number of interested speakers in this paper, there are 2 sites which have not previously been scrutinised, and it would be, I think, especially for the committee, important for us to look in depth at those 2 particular sites as they're new and haven't previously been scrutinised by the committee. So when we're doing that, if we can make sure that we focus more of our time on the areas of this plan that are new and not the areas that have already been covered. But of course, speakers in general, you're also welcome to comment on whatever parts of the plan you'd like. We don't have tons of time, so we'll be trying to keep you to time. Councillors that are visiting, you'll have 4 minutes. Speakers from the public, you'll have 2 minutes. We're going to start with the members of the council that are visiting today. So if Councillor McCormick can come and take a seat and be ready to speak.
Thank you, Chair. So just to provide a bit of context to this, we are facing the acute housing crisis in this country, a shortage of 4 million homes. So looking at section 2.6 of the report, I was very disappointed to see that the view of the council expressed. It's the view of the portfolio holder, not the council. He doesn't speak for me. If he thinks Basingstoke is a special case, he should supply convincing evidence. Attempts to do that failed. There wasn't convincing evidence. There is a massive shortage of housing. We have people who are on a waiting list for several years. This is how it's going to be addressed. However, the devil is in the detail of this plan. Looking at the tall buildings proposal for Basing View, where we've got 60 metres or 20 stories, the AA building is currently higher than 60 metres, but that's just a single block. If we're looking at having multiple blocks of that sort of height in Basing View, that is going to significantly transform the landscape of Basingstoke and have a significant visual impact. And we need to think very carefully about the local services that would accompany those sort of flats and that sort of number. We've already got a scheme that's been granted planning permission. We used to have shops at Basing View, now we don't have any. We ought to think again on that. SPS2, South Hammond Buckskin, well, that's been a complete PR disaster. I'm really not very confident that we'll deliver much in the way of improved housing or increased housing in South Hammond Buckskin. A lot of the housing stock there's already sound, there's no reason to knock it down. Winklebury Regen has still not happened after 25 years. We're looking to add 1,000 new homes from various regeneration projects, but there is the added disadvantage that you're going to be knocking down existing housing stock and you need to rehouse the residents. So you need to build more houses to house them and then build the new houses on the estate. So I really don't hold out much by that approach. Many down I see nudged up to 3,700 houses. Although it is good to see a secondary school in there. Many down south appears to have gone up to 6,000 houses. I'm not sure if that's a merger with the other MDA near North Waltham, because there was 9,500 houses being talked of with those 2 MDAs combined. But whatever happens with our solution to the housing crisis, significant numbers of houses are inevitably going to be built to the southwest of Basingstoke. We need to think very carefully about the transport infrastructure to support that. But what really jumped out at me when reading this report was Upper Swallock and putting in 1,200 houses in this plan and then the rest in the next plan. Frankly, I don't believe that it will just be 2,500 houses in the next plan period. I think once we start building there, we'll open the floodgates. We could see anything up to 10,000 houses. South of the M3, there will be significant transport problems. The A339 is already congested in peak hours, and the alternative is down Woods Lane and overflowing Brighton Way and Hatchwarren Way, already congested roads at rush hour, going past a secondary school. To get a crossing across the M3 will be a considerable challenge. It's very expensive. And then you've got to cross the Ringway South as well. And the roads that are blocked off there, Clidston Road and Cranwell Lane, already go past schools, and that's why they were blocked off. So for numerous reasons, I really don't think Upper Swallock is a very good idea. I'm disappointed to see that it's been included in this plan when there were so many other options available to this council, when they seek to reduce allocations in places like Whitchurch,
Thank you,
Oakley and
Councillor
Old
McCormick. That's
Basin.
your time. Thank you for your contribution.
Well, my conclusion is, we've got to get this right. If you build affordable homes and the right jobs, it will transform the local economy. But I think there's a lot of things that we need to change in this document in front of us tonight.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. As a new administration, we created a plan that had widespread public support last year. It was a huge undertaking, but we discussed it with our communities, we consulted them, we worked with them, and last June we had a plan. And then the new government arrived and blew that local plan up. And let me be absolutely clear here, bearing in mind what Councillor McCormick has just said. We are here now because the government decided to raise our housing target by over 40%. That meant we were never going to meet their transition arrangements. That meant all the good work that we'd done before to move the plan forward at considerable pace was reset. It means a housing target we do not support and a plan we did not need or mean to have. But what I want to remember here also is that where all this began. 6 years ago, the then administration began this local plan review 6 years ago because their government was also then driving up the housing targets. Since then, they've got through 3 leaders and they got through 3 cabinet members, including Councillor Bound, and ended up without a plan and a process that they chose to pause after 4 years. They lost our 5-year housing land supply, something our villages have never recovered from. They dragged their feet on many down for over 17 years, despite the High Court ruling in 2011 telling them to get on with it. And when we took over in May 2023, 12 years later, not one house had been built. Meanwhile, our villages continue to suffer from speculative development as a direct result. It took us less than 18 months to get that deal done. We delivered a plan ready for Reg 19 in less than 18 months. I actually sat round a table in another room in September 2021 when the former Conservative Planning Cabinet member, Councillor Raffel, called for over 800 flats to be built in the town centre. Now, he said that was inevitable, that the need and time was then for redeveloping the town centre with vibrant homes to bring footfall. And Councillor Bound was the Cabinet member for planning then, and he didn't disagree with him, his colleague. So it really is quite rank hypocrisy to hear the Conservatives now cry foul when we propose housing in the town centre. If it's not going to be in the town centre on brownfield sites, then which other villages do you wish to dump it on? We should also all remember Horizon 2050, the previous administration's blueprint for Basingstoke, promoting a population growth of over 200,000 by 2026, and commitments they made then to build thousands of homes more than the housing target. And in 2019, when they started this process, they were building 1,200 homes a year, 50% more than their target, mostly in our villages. So never forget the mess you left behind, because that's the mess that we've been trying to work out and work through over the past 18 months. I actually heard Michael Gove speak recently at an event, and he was asked whether he regretted removing the housing targets. He replied that he'd actually not done that, he'd not removed the housing targets at all, and that the backbench Tories and councillors that went off talking about slowing it down, or that targets had been dropped when they'd not, were wrong. He actually regretted not being able to stand up to them and to drive the targets harder. I thought that was quite shocking. Well, the difference with what we've tried to do is that we've got a head down from day one, led by Andy, and we've actually delivered a local plan that was ready to go to Reg 19 last year. We've talked to people across our borough, in our parishes and the town, and we've listened to them. And it's really important that we've talked with them and not at them. It's our communities that are in the firing line. It's our need for affordable homes, not conveyor belt housing. It's our desire for better housing standards. It's our young families and young people who need a home too. But we have directly lobbied ministers face to face, arguing that design matters, a sense of place matters, how we deal with the gaping hole in infrastructure from GPs to bus services matter. Yet the only thing both the previous government and the current government are bothered about are a fictitious housing target that will never be met.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. What I want to talk about is page 3 of 136, SP32, regeneration of Southam and Buckskin. It's been touched on tonight by Andy, The truth is, originally we were supposed to find 200 houses, now we're going to find 1,000. And that would mean in Southam, which is a settled community, that would mean that we would be building either high-rise flats, which years ago we had knocked down, or either we're going to take a lot of people's gardens. We haven't got the, they want to do more infrastructure work, but that we don't know what the plans are. Now, I honestly believe now the council know the plans and they're not telling us. And if they don't know it, they need to speak up and get SNG in here to tell us what is actually going on. We've got people speaking tonight for this, and as a councillor, I feel as if my hands are tied when I talk to them, because they're telling me what they think is going on, I'm telling them what I think is going on, and we're all coming to the same conclusion. I won't use the word, but they use it a lot in mining. But, you know, this can't go ahead like this. The whole thing, we need to know what's going on. I'm voted in as a councillor, you know, and on all sides, we're all voted in. We need to know, and we're not being told. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, which is nothing to do with this, but it's all part of it, the council has sold off our community centre. I know we weren't using it for more housing. We haven't got a community centre. We haven't had one for years now because of the concrete situation. They're changing the Beacon pub into a community hub of some sort, but it won't be big enough for Southam. It's all being run by SNG, and the answer I'd like to know from the council and from the leader in particular, are we washing our hands of community centres now and let someone else run them? Because the way we're going at the moment, we've got no say in anything. I'll leave the extra minutes for my colleagues back there when they come, if you'd like to use them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. That's an interesting interpretation of the way that the time rules work at the committee. I just wanted to make reference to the separate scrutiny committee that, of course, your ward colleague Gary Watts and one of the Buckskin councillors proposed at the last council meeting. I think it's very important that those who are interested in the Southam Buckskin Regen project in particular pay attention to the development of that scrutiny committee. Obviously, we will be looking to set that up relatively soon, I believe, and we'll keep people posted on that. Now, Councillor Konechko, would you like to come back on any of the visiting councillors' comments at this stage?
Not at this stage, Chairman.
Then we will move on to some of the speakers from the public. Can I remind people to attempt to keep their comments relevant to the report as much as possible, and that you'll have 2 minutes of time to speak. When you come forward, if you come and sit on one of these chairs on the left here, on your right, my left, and just make sure that your microphone is on before you start speaking. We're going to begin with Ken Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Firstly, I was greeted this morning by this terrible headline in the weekly news, plan for 500 homes on West Berkshire's border. I think there's trouble ahead for that. We need a plan that can succeed with these huge targets that we've been given. And in my mind, we've failed over a number of years to deliver the big housing developments, Manny Down. I take my share of responsibility for that, of course. We cannot rely on these big sites to deliver the homes that you need and we need and the future needs. We should be relying on small and medium developers to deliver 40 to 80 homes, because that is what people can do. And a great example is DC made a decision on Bishop's Green. Those homes are being built right now. We can do it, and we can do it properly. Places with infrastructure should take more. Beauhurst, Burghclere, Kingsclere, Headley. Headley's got a better bus service than it's ever had. That will protect places like Ashford Hill, who've got a zero allocation. Wash water. This council spent a fortune going to appeal. That was disgusting, and yet they're proposing to put 500 in it. I do not think that is relevant. The Clare School gets pupils from my ward, or ex-ward, all the time. It will fail unless you start producing houses that will supply pupils to that. You're going to be taking over education. You need to think longer term than just plunking in homes where you think it might fit. We need to look at the A340 corridor, because there are jobs at both ends of that. There's the hospital and AWE. That hospital is going to be there for a while, and I'm sure we're going to hear from it in the future. All I can say to you is that there will be lots of objections. I am happy to make my points both to Joe and to Andy, because I know that they will listen. I hope that you get something out of what I've said tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Alex Whitfield.
Thank you. I'm Alex Whitfield. I'm Chief Executive at Hampshire Hospitals. I have with me Natasha Kerrigan, who's our expert on all these things. Firstly, can I just say a huge thank you that there is an allocation for a new hospital and health campus in this proposal. We're really grateful for all the people that have supported the programme over many, many years. We know that the current hospital, which opened in 1974, was built for 30 years' life. It is no longer fit for purpose, and the local plan wouldn't be complete without a hospital as part of it. So thank you. The site that's been allocated as well is the one that has come out time and time again as the optimal place for the population. There are 3 matters of detail we just wanted to raise that would be really grateful if they could be reflected on. The first is the settlement boundary, then the distributor road, and then the public transport interchange position. So in terms of the boundary, we're really sympathetic to the concerns of the people of North Waltham and Dummer, and we feel it's really important that there is a strategic gap between the villages and the hospital. We have asked that the settlement boundary is expanded to include that gap so that it is protected for those villages for the future. The distributor road currently runs diagonally through the middle of the hospital site. We've asked that it could go round the outside because it will be a lot easier to build a hospital without a road down the middle of it. That would be fantastic, thank you. And the public transport interchange, it has moved to be closer to the hospital, but if it could be near the main entrance, that would allow patients, visitors and staff to use public transport to access the hospital rather than too much car traffic. There are a few other things in our representation which you will have read, but I just want to say a huge thank you that the hospital is there. These are matters of detail that make it possible, and we're really grateful for the partnership work that we do with the council to progress this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. Came in under 5 seconds there. That's brilliant. Graham Falconer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Graham Falconer, Highclere Parish Councillor. I was a Borough Councillor for Evingard for 10 years, and I was on the Development Control Committee until May of last year. My point tonight is that if Oakley Farm goes into the local plan, it could end up as a long, drawn-out and expensive failure for the council. The report states that development in this location has been established because of Watermill Bridge for 270 dwellings, which is over the A343. It's bordered on the north side by the Enbourne River and on the east side, the west side by the A34 bypass. It's a triangular enclosed farm. Oakley Farm, however, is a series of fields either side of 2 single-track roads which serve housing hamlets at Horace Hill and its school, and Penwood and its Penwood Nursery, which is through a tunnel underneath the A34 bypass.
It also has the problem of the main sewage works for South Newbury and North Hants, and it is bordered by the Forestry Commission's Great Pen Wood, and as I mentioned, the River Enbourne on the north side. The Watermill Bridge application was rejected at DCC, allowed by the inspector, but the council saw fit to take it to the High Court for a judicial review about 16 months ago. 2 years ago, Oakley Farm had a PIP for 2 dwellings, refused by officers, and was then rejected on appeal. Next door on Falkland Farm, the application for 5 houses was rejected by DCC and again was rejected at appeal. So on what basis would 500 houses be acceptable? And meanwhile, finally, on Sunday, our bus service was ended by Hampshire County Council. So North Hants is now totally car dependent and hopelessly isolated. Now, in summary,
Please do bring that
Oakley
to a
Farm
close.
is not a solution to the problem of the rather difficult housing targets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Can we next have Alan Forbes? Don't think that microphone's on just yet.
Last year I highlighted the environmental features of Popham that make it wholly unsuitable for housing. The River Itchen SAC and the Solent designations, the Chalk Aquifer, ancient woodlands and the existing biodiversity. These issues remain unresolved. Your own report confirms that concerns remain in terms of the draft allocation at Popham, specifically the ecology and the biodiversity in paragraph 11.2. On top of that, the site engages multiple legal duties. Habitats Regulation 2017, nutrient neutrality, Barbastrella bat SAC, the NPPF paragraph 180, protection of irreplaceable habitats, Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, and the Habitats Regulation safeguarding protected species. Environmental Act 2021 requiring a 10% biodiversity net gain, and the Hedgerow Regulation 1997 protecting ancient boundaries. Popham sits in connectivity corridors between these SACs above, meaning that development risks severing flight lines, foraging routes and contamination, which would be unlawful under the Habitats Regulation. None of these have been addressed. Meanwhile, transport and infrastructure assessments remain incomplete, so there's no certainty that the site could even be developed, let alone meet your own sustainability goals. Despite clear responses from the Civil Aviation Authority, the Aviation APPG, the Royal Aeronautical Society, Sport England and Popham's Category A designation in the UK Strategic Airfields Network, this report completely dismisses the value of Popham Airdrome. Popham's updated perspective is aligned with your own future economy framework, showing it can deliver economic, employment, strategic benefit and without harming the environment. Housing is a challenge, but sacrificing Popham has huge environmental risk and the lack of infrastructure and the loss of nationally recognised aviation. I urge you to delete Popham from the housing plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Zena? Is she, she's disappeared, she's out of the room. No worries. We'll just move, Marcus, we'll switch you and Zena around if that's okay. This is Marcus Simpson.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Marcus Simpson. I am from Slade Bash. I'm a committee member, and I also represent my neighbours on Howard View and Paddock Road. I read with interest all of your appendices to your meeting, and in my 2 minutes, I would specifically like to refer to Appendix 2, page 7, section 2.8, if I may, please. There's a sentence that says the estates comprise of approximately 4,600 homes, approximately half of which a social rent tenure owned by a sovereign network group. Can I just check in with you, please? Does that then mean that half of South Ham is privately owned? My reason for asking that, is that I'm also the chap that sent you the Bash Regeneration V 0.5 PowerPoint, and slide 9 has the Mendeley power matrix. So, if South Ham residents actually own 50% of South Ham, we're in a lot stronger position to say no to certain demolitions, So I'd just like to track with you, please. Do we own 50% of South Ham?
Thank you, Mark. So all of the comments will be responded to by officers at the end of the public speakers. I managed to miss one in my haste. Rob Warbacus, I apologise if I've completely butchered your last name there. Sorry to interrupt you. Could you just make sure that microphone's on, please?
There we go. I'll start again, if I may. So, if I may, I want to speak to you as a nearby resident of Pamber Forest. I live on the A340, adjacent to the site that is proposed to build, or newly proposed to build 260 homes at Skates Lane. It's adjacent to the 900-year-old and ancient Pamber Forest, an area of particular special scientific interest and a hidden gem. I really want to bring these matters to your attention. I believe that the developer has not responded to concerns about the changes that would be needed to be made to the road. And I ask why. I understand that Highways has objected to their proposal for the site. I have been told that the road cannot be widened sufficiently and to agreed safety standards. Has the developer or the council addressed concerns about the disruption on this particular route and impact to all Tadley residents? And this is the only AWE evacuation route and viable emergency services route responding to life-saving emergencies in and around Tadley. Through traffic and HGG traffic will be massively increased and will impact congestion and the ability of services to negotiate the road. And of existing local resident safety, how are we to cross the A340 safely, with my children, without excessive danger? How are we to continue to enter and leave our properties safely? We have a right to a continued safe habitat and way of life. But back to ambulances and emergency services. Seriously, how are they to pass queuing traffic safely when this narrow country road is gridlocked and at a standstill? We know from broadband work this year and traffic lights, constant queues ran from the Basingstoke ambulance station to Tadley and beyond for months on end. And this would go on for years with development. And has the draft spatial strategy addressed the legally binding 1975 covenant between the former owner and current landowner that the land would not be developed? It does not. I know the conversations have taken place with Nicholas Conran, the original landowner, a gentleman now in his 90s, who insists this must be upheld. So none of this has been taken into account. Yes, please build homes in the right places, but to put the additional burden of this proposed development on Tadley's already burgeoning infrastructure and services, situated on a confined and narrow, what is a country road, is surely plainly flawed. If I can say finally, I do believe it's an absurd proposal to build here. It is fundamentally wrong to build on this site, here, a critical nature corridor to a very unique forest, one that the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust has said is Hampshire's second most important woodland, only second to the New Forest itself. So this is a very unique forest in all of Hampshire and on this route. So I implore you please to remove this or not to put this in the plan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Zena, are you ready?
Sorry.
Lovely. If we can have Zena Lindsay.
Thank you.
Is that right? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Right. Chair members, how are you going to protect the requirements of people already living here, like keeping neighbourhoods the way they are, and making sure we can still park by our homes? Accountability and misleading comments. You've heard about the impact of these policies. I want to raise another concern, how our communities has been kept informed. When residents asked about regeneration, many were reassured. They were told the council's administration was not involved. They were told extra housing was not being proposed. But now, with the local plan published, we see something very different. Regeneration housing numbers rising from 200 to 1,000. That is not a small change, it's a major shift. This matters because trust depends on clear and consistent communications. When words and actions don't match, confidence in the whole process is weakened. So yes, we must scrutinise the policy, but we must also look at how information is shared, how trust can be rebuilt, and how residents can feel fully informed and involved. This is an opportunity to improve transparency, to strengthen engagement, and to ensure the local plan has the confidence of the people it affects most, our community. On behalf of Buckskin and South Ham Action Group, I ask the committee, stand with residents, demand regeneration that respects and renews, not one that overwhelms and undermines. Thank you.
Thank you, Zina. I think you make a really important point about engagement, and I hope that Councillor Konitschko makes sure he takes that on board through the public consultation of the local plan. Murray Campbell.
Chair, members, I'm Murray Campbell here representing Old Basing and Lichpit Parish Council. The proposed allocation of 1,500 dwellings at Whitmarsh Lane would cause serious harm to heritage, landscape and biodiversity. First, the site lies beside the River Loddon, an internationally rare chalk stream. Only in May, this council granted personhood rights to local rivers. To place such a large development on the boundary would be wholly inconsistent with that decision. Second, the site lies next to Basingstoke's sewage treatment works and the incinerator. Increasing the allocation from 450 to 1,500 homes would force dwellings much closer to these facilities, exposing residents to odour, poor air quality and potential health risks. Third, safe access is unproven. The only route runs through the floodplain of Petty's Brook, which carries substantial risk. Most concerning, members are being asked to decide without the key evidence. Updated assessments on flooding, landscape, biodiversity, heritage, transport and water are either unpublished or still in progress. Government guidance is clear. Evidence must shape the plan, not follow afterwards. The report claims the strategy responds to the climate and ecological emergencies, yet placing 1,500 homes beside an internationally important chalk stream directly contradicts that principle. For these reasons, the allocation at Whitmarsh Lane should not proceed. Growth should be directed to less constrained or previously developed sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mandy Green.
Sorry, change glasses.
I live in South Ham and I am concerned about the plans for the area. Our GP practice is currently oversubscribed by over 10,700 patients. They have had significant difficulties recruiting doctors. With an ageing population in this country, access to a GP when needed is crucial to avoid escalation of illness with potentially fatal consequences. Building significantly more properties in the area will increase demand on the already overstretched doctors and other local services. They are barely functioning now. Moving existing residents out will move them away from their doctors, their friends, neighbours, churches, support networks, and local clubs and groups. If any building work is to be done, it needs to be done for the benefit of the existing community, not a new community moving in from elsewhere. I understand the government have significantly increased the number of properties that need to be built each year, and this has led to a revised local plan for Basingstoke. Building thousands of new properties when it is obvious that infrastructure such as GP surgeries are not going to cope is quite simply negligence. As the Environment and Infrastructure Committee, what powers and influence do you have to oppose, amend, or even stop planning permission?
Thank you very much. Gillian Moore.
Dear Committee, I speak today on behalf of the Old Basing and Litchpit Environmental Campaign in objection to the large-scale development at land at Whitmarsh Lane, as it now seems to be called. We recognise the need for housing, but housing must not come at any cost, not at the cost of public health, the environment, or the lives of future residents. Everybody is explaining why development doesn't fit into their area, but our contention is that no other area faces this unique combination of challenges. I'm going to highlight 4. As already had been said, the River Loddon, flowing through the area, is a rare chalk stream, already under pressure from aquifer abstraction and sewage discharges. Paving over nearby fields with thousands of hounds will only mean more sewage, more runoff, and more risk to one of England's most fragile ecosystems. Second, the sewage works. It was sited where it is for one reason, the smell. Yet thousands of homes are proposed just metres away now, with a claim that a few saplings might solve the problem. I have to tell you, you can sometimes smell it at the far end of Litchpit where I live, so it's very difficult to believe that new housing would not be affected. Additionally, it can always, or not always, cope with the processing the sewage it has now. In March, when there was already a dry period of weather, it was dumping raw sewage into the Loddon. It won't cope with any more houses. Third, the Chinham incinerator. It burns waste from across the region. Incinerators are under a moratorium because of health concerns. We've mapped its fallout. It was claimed to us by some consultants once that the plume goes safely off to the northeast. It doesn't. It can go anywhere. The wind doesn't always come from one direction. And again, it was sited where it is because it was away from housing. Fourth, the floodplain. The sites have been rejected in the past.
You can begin to bring your comments to a close.
Because of flooding. Climate change is aimed to make things worse. Look, nothing has changed. Not the incinerator, not the sewage works, not the river, not the flood risk. It's been rejected before. I don't understand it being here now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Stafford Napier.
Good evening, members. I'm Stafford Napier. Many of you know me. I live in Dummer, and here we are again. This is going to be a little bit different. It's something I'm puzzled about in the plan that's been presented. The revised version of the MPPF imposes on LPAs an even greater requirement to work across borders, with adjacent LPAs for the purposes of strategic planning. It even allows unmet housing needs to be transferred across boundaries. The stated intention is to encourage a consistent approach to major infrastructure improvements and to coordinate funding. In light of this strengthened MPPF requirement, I'm asking members to request or to ask what steps have been taken by this authority to coordinate the strategic housing allocation at Popham with Winchester City Council. In devising its strategy, has the Council held discussions with Winchester on the possibility of a coordinated development at Popham and at Micheldever, thereby allowing the sharing of housing requirements as envisaged by the MPPF? This would provide significant extra resources for major transport improvements, both at the station and at the Overton Road junction on the A303, which would relieve the otherwise inevitable pressure on the A30 corridor trying to access junction 7 of the M3, which would also have an effect on the hospital. It could also avoid the southwest of Basingstoke becoming simply one long ribbon of housing, especially given the sensitivity that's in the strategic plan that's stated there, the sensitivity of the ridgeline at South Manydown adjacent to North Waltham. Have such discussions taken place? If not, why not? If they have, what has been the outcome? Surely the mismatch of the plan-making timetables between Winchester and Basingstoke cannot be allowed to stand in the way of one of the more sensible innovations that's in the MPPF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our public speakers. If I could ask Councillor Konechko to respond to anything that he felt he could respond to at this time.
Thank you, Chair, and yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd just say a huge thank you to everybody who's spoken this evening, given up part of their Thursday evening to be here. We have, as hopefully you've seen, officers and I have been jotting down your comments, and we'll consider them over the course of the next few days as we prepare the plan and look to do additional research. I will address each of the speakers in turn, but before I do that, I think what tonight's conversation shows the challenges of putting together a local plan when you've got such a high housing number. So we've had suggestions tonight to remove Oakley Farm, which is 500 homes, Popham, 1,800 homes, Upper Swallock, 1,200 homes, Skates Lane, 245, Whitmarsh Lane, 1,500. So collectively, in the past half an hour or so, I've been asked to remove over 5,000 homes from the local plan allocation. I actually understand your reasons for doing that, but I think it does go to show that you know, it is a tricky process, and we are doing our best in very trying circumstances. If I may, Chair, I'll just quickly respond to each of the speakers in turn. So Ken, thank you very much for your suggestion around potentially looking at SME developers to take on additional sites. We'd be very keen to have continued discussions with you. I think you're one of the few people who are actually asking for more homes to be built rather than fewer. So we are all ears and are happy to have continued conversations over the coming months on that. Alex, your comments about the hospital allocation, thank you for your support. We have jotted down those three issues that you raised, and we will work with officers to see how we can best address those. Graham, thank you for your comments on Oakley Farm. I would echo the concerns you've raised about the bus service and the loss of that from because of the Hampshire County Council cutting its funding. Infrastructure is an issue, and a number of speakers brought that up over the course of the past half an hour or so. And it is something that we are pushing really hard in our local plan policies. So tonight, obviously, we are discussing the spatial strategy and the site allocation. There is a whole suite of policies that we consulted on during Reg 18, which we are also looking at separately, and they look to strengthen the plan to make it as vital to really emphasise on and hold developers to account in terms of making sure that the supporting infrastructure is there when they build these additional homes. Alan, thank you for your comments on Popham. You mentioned that some of the assessments are incomplete. You're absolutely right. We're sort of in that chicken and egg situation at the moment where we can't run our full transport assessment and integrated impact assessment and water cycle study until we know what sites we've got allocated. But we don't want to allocate those sites until we've gone to scrutiny and had these conversations with you. So we can't give you the full evidence because we haven't made the final allocation. But I appreciate that does lead to a situation where you're having to comment on incomplete information. Marcus, Zena and Mandy, all sort of useful comments on the South Ham and Buckskin regeneration. Marcus will get back to you about the 50% ownership. I've spoken to officers and we'll have to go back and we'll need to double check that. But what I would stress, I think, to everybody who's raised concerns this evening about the regeneration of South Ham and Buckskin is that this is an SNG project. It is something that they are running. However, as a number of people have made clear, the council does have a role in making sure that they are held to account. That will happen at cabinet level. That will also happen through this new scrutiny committee that we voted as a council to introduce last time we met. So, yeah, we will hold them to account. Rob, your comments on Skates Lane, again, thank you for those. As part of the process, as I mentioned, we will be undertaking a full transport assessment, and as part of the Regulation 18, if Skates Lane remains in there, we will be consulting with Hampshire, with the emergency services and others to make sure that their thoughts, their concerns are taken into account. Murray and Gillian, thank you for your comments on Whitmarsh Lane. You've stressed the value of the Loddon and our waterways. I think we fully agree with that. I was supportive of the motion that was passed successfully earlier on this year around giving rights to rivers, and that remains an important part of the Cabinet's thinking, my own personal thinking, as we develop the local plan. So we will keep that in mind, and we will make sure that the policies surrounding any new developments, regardless whether it's Whitmarsh Lane or somewhere else, does make sure it protects our natural environment and our waterways. And I think that leaves just Stafford, talking about cross-border cooperation with Winchester. Yes, certainly at a councillor level, I have been having conversations with my counterparts at Winchester. The situation is complicated because, as you've said, our local plan timetables aren't quite in sync. They've just gone through their Regulation 19, so aren't currently as active as we are in terms of looking for additional sites. They also have the additional challenge at the moment that there is the proposed new town that the government is considering and is due to report back anytime soon. So I think conversations are happening, will continue to happen, but I think a lot will depend on what happens with this new town, and inevitably, as part of the process, conversations will have to happen in due course because Winchester has an obligation to increase its housing number as well. I know conversations have been happening at officer level as well. I'm not sure, Joe or Jenny, if you want to share anything about your conversations with Winchester, or whether I've just covered that off in what I've done.
Thanks, Councillor Konechka. I can just add that, yes, officers do meet counterparts in Winchester as part of our due to cooperate meetings that we have. This is something we've talked about for quite a while now, the potential for this site. From Winchester's perspective, that currently there's no appetite for development at Mitchell-Dever. And in fact, they actually put in an objection to the last Reg 18 about Popham and the impact on their borough. But those conversations will continue as we move forward.
Thank you, Joe. And Chair, back to you.
Lovely, thank you so much, and thank you to all of our speakers. Apologise for having to be so strict on time. There was a lot of you to get through, and still a lot to get through, but we really appreciate your contribution. If there's anything you weren't able to say, please do get it to the committee or to Andy in writing so that it can still be considered. We'll now move on to, what am I moving on to, Ellie? Now, so more addressed to the committee, but you're also all welcome to continue to observe. The spatial strategy that we're actually looking at today, obviously you've had a bit of an introduction from Andy, and Jenny went through some of the things that have changed since the last time. So as much as possible, that looking at some of the changes is where we're going to try and focus a lot of the scrutiny. Obviously, I'm sure people have areas of it that they're particularly interested in honing in on. I think to begin with, if we could, where am I going first, Jenny? What does this mean? Lovely. So I think we're going to start by looking at section 4 of the report. What we'll do is, through this, we'll work through different sections, and then if there's parts of it that we don't get through that haven't been highlighted by the officers as changes, then we can also get to those afterwards. So we'll start with section 4 of the report, which is spatial strategy and key principles from section 4, which I think are on page 14 of the agenda? 14, is it? I'm not sure. I'm reading these words. I'm taking them as gospel. They might be completely wrong. Yeah, 14. Councillor Vox.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask a question about 4.2, section 2, about Basing View, but going back a little bit, I had a couple of more general questions. I couldn't find in this report the phasing of the different developments, what the timing would be over the term of the plan, which I think is really important to understand because of the development of community facilities. So, for example, the development at Redlands has happened before East of Basingstoke, whereas in our current plan, East of Basingstoke was meant to happen before. So there are no community facilities at Redlands, and all the people who live there have to access community facilities elsewhere that were not designed for them. So the phasing of these developments, I think, is really important, and I couldn't find it. Maybe it's there. If officers could show me, it'd be really helpful. Also, going back to paragraph 2.2, which talks about the integrated impact assessment and the health impact assessment specifically, it said it wasn't yet ready. But I wanted to check with officers if it would include issues like water supplies, you know, thinking about our River Loddon and about our sewage facilities and the other things going on. Will that health impact assessment look at water supplies, sewage supplies, the pollution of the extra traffic on our roads, those aspects? And when it's done, will it come back to E&I? Were my questions on that. And then to finally come to 4.2, which is, I know what you've asked about. So in the second one, it talks about Basing View and the economic and employment imperative of that area for us as a borough. Looking through the papers, I found a paucity of mention of Chinham Business Park. Chinham Business Park is hugely important for employment in the east of the borough. A lot of the people who live in the east, the northeast, work there. We're talking about an additional 2,190 houses in this part of the borough. I would like to understand how much thinking has been around the economic and employment opportunities in that area, not just in Basing View. So those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. I might forget some of your questions as I go through, but yeah, just remind me. So the phasing question, no, you haven't missed it. There isn't any specific phasing in there at the moment. That's something that we will be working up, particularly as we go through our annual monitoring processes and things to sort of nail that down. We are hoping that there'll be more information in the Reg 18 consultation on that element. I think your next question was about the health impact assessments. Issues such as water and the other things that you mentioned, they're looked at in the round. So the whole assessment has different parts. Part of that is the sustainability appraisal, which looks particularly at environmental impacts as well as social and economic. So that's caught in all of that, rather than specifically the health impact assessment. Although it does touch on it, but in more detail it's in the sustainability appraisal. So that is covered in detail through that overall process, and that's part of the reason why we're doing the integrated impact assessment approach, so that it captures everything. As Jenny mentioned earlier, the IIA, Integrated Impact Assessment, gets updated all the way through, and we will bring that to committee alongside papers as this develops through, and it will also go to Cabinet and other things. It very much informs decision making, so that's why we'll pull that through. The last point about economic and employment areas, particularly Chinham, absolutely, I agree. You probably recall that through the last Reg 18 consultation, we had the policies in there about employment areas, particularly strategic employment areas, and it designated those areas. We're not consulting specifically on that this time, but that all still stands, as was the case in terms of protecting that area.
Question, Chair.
Yeah, quick, go.
Humour me. Oh, it's very quick. What will the health impact assessment cover then?
It does cover all things, but not the same depth. So it's kind of more of a higher level, an impact on residents and things like that from the social side. So it does look at it, looks at infrastructure, hospital, for example, GPs across the board really, and also healthy lifestyles. So how sustainable the plan is in terms of walking and cycling and all of that. It looks at it across the board at a high level.
Councillor Tuck?
Thank you. It's slightly to follow up on, I know you're going to say this is part of the integrated impact assessment, but it's really frustrating not having more of that to hand. So in particular, I've had a resident ask me about the statutory supply authorities for both water, wastewater and electricity, and asking basically, are you confident that the sites can be delivered with housing from a statutory utility services perspective? Have you received confirmation from those authorities that the overall level of development in the borough can be supported? Are you using third-party specialist engineering consultants to assist you in assessing these infrastructure needs? And what measures do you propose to take if the development of some sites becomes technically or financially unviable and government housing numbers cannot be met? Which I thought was a... and then I've got another follow-up about the water cycle bit.
Thank you, Councillor Tuck. Many of those issues that you just talked about in terms of utilities and things are caught up in the infrastructure development plan, delivery plan, sorry, which covers all of infrastructure issues. So there is an infrastructure note at the back of the papers, which is quite high level at this stage, but there will be a lot more information that comes out of the Reg 18. So those conversations have been going on for quite some time and will continue to, again, as the plan develops. The water issues particularly, as you'll be aware, it was captured more in the water cycle study. So again, that has been commissioned. The work that's taken place so far, they've already identified that there are issues in terms of supply and also impact in terms of sewage treatment works, for example. So there will need to be a lot of work with the Environment Agency and the water companies to make sure that that infrastructure is where it needs to be to accommodate the development that the local plan proposes. That is part of what the examination will ultimately do, is really look at whether these sites that are allocated are deliverable in all ways, including infrastructure delivery. So that is something that will be tested, and we will need to show that they're deliverable, and those very issues will need to have been addressed.
Okay, thank you. On the water, if I look at page 26, paragraph 4.25, and we've got, you know that there will need to be updates to accommodate growth to the sewage treatment works. I know Thames Water have failed to deliver what they promised in the last local plan, that they are delayed on delivering what they said they'd deliver by now to meet the last local plan, and that we are now having such an uplift to our housing numbers that there will need to be significant improvements. In addition to that layer, obviously you've got their obligation to do that, but we've also had the Environment Act, which is saying we have to take a proactive approach and a precautionary principle so that we don't pollute our rivers. So I'm just saying there are two layers there that really need to join together. What will we be doing as an authority to make sure that we do not continue with an infrastructure deficit? And I could be talking about almost any of our infrastructure on this in this way, but picking on water for now. What are we going to do to make sure that our residents and our environment is not the bit that suffers? Please.
Councillor Konechka, you can come in. I could just remind committee members to try and keep things relevant to the report and the spatial strategy in particular today, just because there will be a lot of spatial strategy stuff to get through.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Kate, for those questions. I think you know, because we've had this discussion many times that the water cycle study is something that we've pretty much ripped up and started again. We want this to be absolutely thorough. We want it to be very clear to us what the infrastructure providers need to do in order to sustain the level of housing growth that we've been asked. We're waiting for the results of that. That should be ready, certainly a first draft should be ready in time for Regulation 18, so we'll be able to take a look at that and comment on it. Ultimately, though, if that shows that we have an infrastructure deficit as far as water goes, if that shows that the water companies aren't providing the sufficient capacity, then I think we do have a strong case to go back to government and say, look, we just can't deliver this housing number, and here is the clear evidence why. I think that's what we're missing at the moment, because you and I, probably everybody in this room will have concerns about infrastructure delivery. I don't think any of us have a particularly high opinion of water companies and what they've managed to deliver over the past decade or so, particularly in our area. But until we can come up with very robust evidence that demonstrates that they've let us down already, or that they do not have sufficient investment plans to take it forward going in the future, then we don't have a case. But as soon as we can find that evidence, then we will use it to argue our case with government. I can assure you of that.
Thank you. And over at Councillor Chatburn.
I can't find any evidence of it in this document. So has the joint emergency planning team signed off the 5, 8 and 12 kilometre development zones? And a subsequent question to that is, how does the deliverability of Skates Lane reconcile with the point that it's outside the DEPZ until it's built, and then it will be classified as within the DEPZ?
Thank you. Who wants to come back on that?
So the ONR and the emergency planners and all the relevant stakeholders are all included and consulted as part of the plan. They have come back previously. Obviously, Skates Lane hasn't been in there as an allocation before, so they haven't formally commented on that particular proposal. They will do that through the consultation of the Reg 18. But through the conversations that we have had with them, they have confirmed that they would object to allocations within the DPZ, but not outside of that. In terms of reviewing the boundaries, that is something that you'll know that they do regularly as things change, and they will continue to do that. This is based on their current position, which is their public position, which they updated relatively recently.
If I can ask a subsequent question, that doesn't really resolve the question about the chicken and egg, that if it's outside the DEPZ until it's approved, then it's classified as within the DEPZ.
If it's allocated, I mean, that takes a position as of the time it's allocated.
Yep.
So it's, unless things change, which they may, but as it currently stands, it's outside the DEPZ. When they next review that boundary, if they choose to then include it within the DEPZ, they may do that, but at the moment they have said that's not the case, that's not what they're looking at doing currently.
Right.
So they support that allocation as it currently stands at the moment.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Dillo.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm talking about the neighbourhood renewal section in the spatial strategy. I was a bit alarmed, obviously, to see that the increase to 1,000 new homes from 200. Can you clarify where that 1,000 will be? Because obviously it says initially across Buckskin, Southam, Norden and Winklebury, but do we know exactly where they'll be and in the different areas?
No, the plan isn't specific at the moment. It's just 1,000 over all regeneration or urban renewal processes. The policy highlights priority areas at the moment, and some of those you mentioned. That they don't have specific figures attached to any of those areas, and there could be other areas that come forward. This is over the whole plan period, so this is over sort of 17-year period that number of homes are considered as potentially coming forward. So no, it's a broader figure at this stage.
So, sorry, just to clarify, so obviously, residents across Southam and Buckskin are already very concerned about the lack of detail. So I think clarification on what areas are going to be impacted would be really beneficial to residents, because at the moment they're all in limbo.
Yeah, I think it goes back to another chicken and egg situation, Sean, in the sense that, as we've all said publicly when we've met as a full council, we want residents to be involved in those conversations, and we want resident consultation in terms of the future plans. Those plans don't currently exist. Realistically, we're not going to get that all that consultation done between now and Reg 18 happening hopefully just before Christmas. So I think, almost in the sense that if we want proper consultation, it means that we can't have those detailed plans just yet, that the consultation takes time if you want to do it properly, and I don't think there's any way of squaring that particular circle.
I'll just ask a question or two of my own before I've got Councillor Carr after. Just on that then, Councillor Konechko, at what stage will we have firmer answers? I mean, I'm sure there will be a question that the public ask us as well. Particularly to Councillor Gillo's point, if there's 1,000 dwellings going across 4 different sites, can we expect 5 in Winklebury or 500 in Winklebury? Can we expect 300 in Southam or 100 in Southam? I think it's quite important for us to understand that, and also not just the fact that I take that you don't have the answer on that yet, but we also need to know when you'll have an answer and why we don't yet have an answer if we're getting to this stage of the local plan that's in there.
Yeah, I'll hand over to Jenny in terms of the detail, but in terms of the bigger picture, the point is, as you know, with Southam and with Buckskin, these are SNG projects. The timetable is down to them. Yes, we can hold them to account, and yes, we can tell them you need to consult and you need to get on with it because of the resident uncertainty. But ultimately, it's not for us to dictate when they are ready to produce those numbers. So we've got the broad figure overall for the sites, but beyond that, there isn't. Yeah, there's no hidden agenda here. There aren't any hidden plans that are happening behind the scenes that SNG aren't sharing with anyone. This is a broad allocation because we need something for the Regulation 18, given the broader timescales we have. But at the moment, that level of detail doesn't exist, and it will be up to SNG in particular to give that timescale rather than us as a local authority.
Yep, just before I'll let you do that. The only thing I'd continue to challenge Councillor Konechko is that isn't. The local plan is our chance to dictate. This is our opportunity to say this is what we want and this is what we will allow up to. If we're saying that SNG have the option to go from either 200 new dwellings to 1,000 new dwellings in that place, and other projects might come along for the other areas, this is our chance to dictate that where those things go. So you're saying vaguely in 4 areas we might get more dwellings, and we don't yet have the answer. And also it would be helpful to know what conversations have been had with SNG at this stage, because they're obviously engaging as much as I hope they're meant to be engaging. So where are they? You know, if we already know that 1,000 is the right maximum to put on it, then we must know some numbers vaguely enough, else we might be capping them too low.
If you don't mind, sorry, Councillor Konechko, Chair, I'll try my best to take that one. We've obviously got an adopted local plan that talks about 200 units broadly in, I think what that plan talks about regeneration areas, whereas this is a bit more about renewal areas in broader placemaking terms. As Councillor Konechko said, there are no hidden plans. There's nothing that's been shared with us by SNG. So it is chicken and egg, because to allocate sites, you need to have sites put forward by a landowner. They don't know what those sites are because they're engaging with the community on their proposals. So I think there's a little bit about their engagement with the community, understanding what the community wants and how that fits in and what might come forward, might run in parallel with the plan. There might be an opportunity at Regulation 19 stage for them to say to us, we've worked with the community, we now have an idea, it's X, Y, Z sites. Can we put those forward? You know, could you particularly specify them rather than at the moment the boundaries? You're seeing Councillor Dillo goes around everything. It might be they don't align, and we don't know that until we get planning applications. I think we're just doing our very best to work together, as Councillor Konechko said. They are SNG's projects at the end of the day. So to an extent, as a planning team, we're relying on the work that they're doing with residents. I think it's worth also saying, obviously Winklebury, Vivid is keen to continue its regeneration proposals at Winklebury. It obviously needs to reconsider what that looks like, but that is part of the neighbourhood renewal figure ultimately in terms of housing that comes forward. So we're not trying to evade the question. It is literally these things are being worked up alongside. We don't have the details. If we do, then we'll be able to include them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Councillor Carr, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to explore the section on rural areas in this section of the report. So that's the element beginning 4.13. Rightly, our approach to the settlement study and settlement approach acknowledges that communities and settlements that have demonstrated historic delivery or who are about to deliver significant homes get something of a discount. And this is explored later in the appendix. But of course, while that's fine in principle, I'm afraid the way that it has worked out for my parishes of Highclere and East Woody is deeply toxic. What's happened, of course, is because the detail of the policy says that you can only receive a credit for delivery if it's in relation to a settlement policy boundary, you have this really unfortunate situation where my parishes of Highclere and East Woody together will be delivering about 270 homes, split roughly half and half. And because of the location of that site, which is of course a site that this council rightly took all the way to the court, there is no policy credit for the delivery of about 135 houses each for those two parishes. So in Highclere and in East Woody, there is a real sense of resentment and of grievance and of upset that because of the technicality of the way that this has been drawn in relation to settlement policy boundaries, my parishes rightly feel they're doing a lot, they're contributing a lot through Watermill Bridge, and yet that is not recognised, whereas there are other settlements in this plan, I'm thinking of Old Basing, for example, and others, where that credit for previous delivery has been acknowledged. Now, if you take a purely technical view on position in relation to the settlement policy boundary, it's the correct position. But I think I would implore the administration really to consider the impact of Watermill Bridge and really to take an exceptional view that actually Highclere and East Woody should have credit for their delivery. This is particularly important if, and we'll come on to this later, if the administration wishes those two places to take on Oakley Farm as well, a 500 home development. And if you're proposing within the course of the next few years 770 or so houses in that northern corner of our borough, I really implore the administration to consider how we can reasonably and fairly deny those communities that credit for the delivery that they're actually going to do. And I think there's an appeal there to not be tied down to a computer says no approach, and to recognise that, you know, communities are communities, and a black line around one settlement shouldn't be a barrier to thinking reasonably and fairly about these things.
Councillor Konechka?
Thank you very much. Yes, noted. It's not so much computer says no as inspector says no, but within those constraints we can certainly look at that and see if there is any flexibility to acknowledge the previous over-delivery.
I wondered if the officers might be able to come in on the technicality of that, if they've got it, or maybe come back later if they've not on the boundary.
Yes, in terms of computer says no comment, it's actually in the planning policy, so it's in the adopted local plan in terms of what the policy allows you to count and not count in terms of contributing towards the settlement figures that are in that plan. So we can't change policy in terms of how we are crediting things in the past. So that's why that approach has been taken. It's rolling forward that same approach. What you're asking is almost, do we want a different approach to basically credit in a different way? So that's quite different. So that's something we will take away.
Councillor Carr, follow up?
Just a very quick follow-up to that. Well, I'm grateful to the officers for their confirmation that they will explore that different approach to credit. If, and I would obviously encourage that to be successful and be delighted if that went forwards, but if a view was taken that credit cannot be accounted differently, then I think we also need to think in a forward direction. I think if we as sort of between sensible human people recognise that actually there is additional credit that should be granted to these two parishes, but we can't within the policy constraints, then I would implore a slightly more fair approach to that Oakley Farm proposal. You know, we've put a number of 500 on that site. We'll talk about the reasonableness of that site later, but if that site is pursued, then can we think about how the number attached to that site can reflect the credit that we ought to deliver to Highclere and East Woody?
Anyone want to come back at all on anything? No. Lovely. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. How well do you think the draft spatial strategy supports and promotes the local nature recovery strategy? I ask that question in a broad sense across the whole borough, in that it's quite new regulation, it's quite new strategy, and it's mentioned within the spatial strategy. But when you start looking at the detail of it, it's basically ignored. So if you take Skates Lane as an example, 70 to 80% of the area of Skates Lane proposal is a biodiversity opportunity or focus area, shall I say. And I appreciate that the LNRS is not a regulation, but it is a guidance to ensure that plans are developed with nature recovery in mind to enable the administration to meet their obligations under the Environment Act. So I'd be interested to understand how well you think this has been done.
Yes, so the LRNS, as you say, is developing at the moment. It's getting very close to being adopted, hopefully in the next few months. But we have taken regard to it as it's developed and looked at the opportunity areas. And we do quite a detailed site assessment process where we look at all of the sites, which we may come back to. That is included within that process where we look at biodiversity in the broadest sense. So it has been considered through that process. It's true to say that a significant number, I think, of our proposed allocations are impacted by the LNRS in terms of where the opportunity areas have been identified. It varies from many down to the west and to the east, Popham, sites to the north in terms of Tadley. So a broad number of our allocations are impacted. I think it's important to say that the LRNS is very clear that opportunity areas where they've been identified are not sort of anti-development. They're not a restriction on development. That is not the point of it. It's not a designation in the same way as, say, a national landscape, for example. It's more about making sure that in those areas, the opportunities for nature restoration, particularly in terms of linkages and networks, are taken where they can be. And that is why we've incorporated the LNRS into the relevant allocation policies to make sure that all of the details within that document are very much taken into account. So just taking Skates Lane, for example, as you said, about 60% of it is within that broader opportunity area, which runs sort of along the north of that site. So it would be looking at things like making sure there is a suitable, wide enough ecological corridor along the north of that site. The LRNS is quite detailed about certain elements. So, for example, it says 5 to 10 metres corridor along the top of Skates Lane. So that's the sort of thing that we would look at, the detail of that. Because that's included in the policy, we can then look at the detail within the LRNS to make sure those elements are considered properly as those sites come forward.
Just as a quick answer, I think the within the layout of the ecology area in the draft plan, draft strategy, it actually describes creating a corridor that already exists, so it won't create anything. The second point is that the area that's covered by the opportunity focus area is not the green area, it's actually the housing area. Now, if the housing area was moved substantially, that would make a big difference. But at the moment, it's probably worthwhile considering as well that the biodiversity team have raised an objection on the outline planning application for exactly the same reasons as the LNRS. So I find it difficult to appreciate that it's a site that's been allocated within this spatial strategy.
If I can just pick up on that, Chair, I think you raise a really good point, Kevin, between the difference between the site allocation and a specific planning application that's currently in now. So with the planning application, you know, the developers have put forward specific areas where they want to build homes, where they want to put in infrastructure. With the site allocation, the local plan that we're discussing tonight, we've not gone to that level of detail. So we're not saying, you know, if those developers are putting homes in a particularly challenging area for us, and there may be, I think as one of the speakers mentioned earlier, there are outstanding objections to that doesn't necessarily apply to the site, because the makeup of the site, where we put the homes, where we put the infrastructure, doesn't necessarily have to follow the details of the current planning application. So I think it's just important to make that distinction between the two.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, but excuse me, by being allocated in spatial strategy, that gives a lot of weight to the outline planning application being approved.
Lovely. Unless there's anything else to add, I'll move on. No. It's Councillor Slimmon next.
Thank you, Chair. You've talked about the transport assessment. Could you give me some idea of when that might arrive? And could you make some comments on a comment that was made at the Tadley Town Council meeting on Monday from our Hampshire County Council councillor, Councillor Derek Mellor, who basically said that the Highways Authority will never allow an entrance onto the A340 to Skates Lane area, and therefore will the transport assessment actually cover that matter, and if it becomes negative, would that be make any difference? And I would also say, I've been talking, Councillor Chatburn is also aware, is that I'm on the AWE Liaison Committee, and you may or may not know that obviously AWE are in West Berkshire, so it doesn't cover our employment area, but an awful lot of people do use it. And there is a plan for up to 9,000 people to be on that site, including the people that are building all the new buildings that are on the site. So 9,000 people have somehow to get to the site. Many of them don't use the bus. In fact, I've tried to persuade them, but they don't. The nearest station is Aldermaston, which is quite a distance away. So obviously everybody is going to be in a car. So the amount of traffic on that road is going to increase. So I can understand where the county are now saying, on the planning application, I know, but that is not, but it is a matter for this, because if we are going to put a site in here that cannot be delivered because it's a landlocked site that has not got any access to the main road, how on earth can we justify including it? And I'd be interested in your comments.
Just in terms of the transport assessment, so that is a significant piece of work that takes a number of months to complete. So that has been commissioned and that is underway. We are hoping to have an interim report by the time for Regulation 18. There are numerous parts to that study. So the first part of it will look at the impact on the highway. So we hope to get to that point. Then once we finalise what our strategy will be, it will look in more detail at what mitigation measures are needed. So that will follow, but will be in time for the Reg 19 that Jenny was referring to next summer. So we would need that as part of that evidence. In terms of the comments that you've mentioned from Hampshire County Council, I'm not obviously aware of that. That's something that we'll have to take away and talk to them about. We have consulted them obviously through the local plans so far. They've not raised any objections to that, to us, from the local plan perspective, so we will see what's been said about the planning application. There is a criteria in the policy that talks about ensuring safe access, and as you say, that's obviously key to the deliverability of that site, so we would need to make sure that that can be delivered if the site is to come forward.
I think you've heard from residents here about the access on the road, which is a really, really busy road, and I believe it's about 97% capacity now. It cannot be widened because there is straight into conservation area, and there is no way that we can improve the road. So this is a safety issue. I understand that the fire service are already under some scrutiny at the moment because they could be cutting fire stations, which might mean that the Chadley station might disappear. I don't know whether that is true, but there's a rumour around, and we are all getting emails about the fire service changes. So again, it will depend on things coming from Basingstoke instead of actually having the retained firemen at Chadley. It's therefore very vitally important, not just for the residents, well, especially for the residents, but also for AWE, that people are going to be able to access the site if there is an emergency. We did have a fire a few years ago when I worked for the Environment Agency in emergency planning, and I can tell you that the whole of the area went to total gridlock because the fire service blocked all the roads, as they would have to. And this was a fire in the area that actually looks after explosives. So, you know, there are precedents there. The Environment Agency commented on the plan at the time, and they are doing that. At AWE Liaison Committee, I'm asking the questions about how they're going to cope with extra housing and extra people. We don't believe that the fact that this road is not going to be improved, and it cannot be improved, we believe, because there isn't enough space to do it. We don't believe that this is a satisfactory answer to the way that things are moving. And when we come to actually talk about the site allocation, I will obviously speak more. Thank you.
Councillor Dillo.
Thank you, Chair. Just moving on to 4.32 and 4.31, talks about the delivery and obviously the stepped trajectory that was put forward initially. Can we have clarification on what the new stepped trajectory may be? And obviously that means reducing numbers initially and then backloading them further down the line. And also with 4.31 infrastructure, obviously the plan promises infrastructure, schools, hospitals, GP facilities, roads and shops and things like that, but the delivery is really unclear, and obviously risks also being backloaded after housing starts. So I'm just wondering whether we could clarify how the council will ensure that obviously the imposed increased housing numbers will actually be built out. And I'm assuming adopting this plan, will we get a 5-year supply? So, but if developers, and we will be at the mercy of developers, if developers decide not to build and build at a slower rate, will that obviously affect our land supply? And if that drops below 5 years, will this open out to obviously speculative applications and things like that?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that one up. And yes, Sean, you've hit upon the challenge that we and all other local authorities face, and that we are held accountable for delivery as part of the local plan. And yet, unless we are major house builders ourselves, we have very little control. It's something we raised with the government last summer when they had their consultation, because we've got, I think, close to 6,000 outstanding planning consents in our borough at the moment, and very little leverage to encourage developers to bring them forward. And you know, in this market, developers don't want to bring them forward. They don't want to saturate the market. They don't want to see their profit margins drop. It's incredibly frustrating for us because we lack the 5-year housing land supply, but there is very little we can do about it, and that will remain the case. nothing has changed as part of the NPPF that gives us any additional controls over that. Going back to your point about the sort of the build-out rate and delivery, that goes back to the comment that I think Jenny made right at the start of the question she asked about the schedule of delivery. It's something that we hope we will have ready in time for Regulation 18 at the end of the year.
Do you want to come back at all?
Yeah, just very quickly then. So the fact that we've been imposed with 1,152 a year is quite, well, it's going to be for the birds, really, isn't it?
I would hope not. I mean, we are developing this plan in consultation with the developers and the landowners. They are telling us what they believe they can deliver. We are challenging those assumptions because we know that whilst in the short term it's helpful to have the numbers as high as possible, in the long term we've actually got to watch as this is developed and actually delivered. So it is up to us as a local authority, both as Cabinet and officers, and also to you as fellow councillors, to scrutinise that, to challenge that, and that's certainly what we're doing. I think hopefully that's what will also happen this evening. But yeah, we need to make sure that that plan is realistic, and because we're doing it in consultation with developers rather than imposing it on them, we hope that they will stick to the commitments that they've made. But we can't enforce that, unfortunately. That's the challenge that we and all other local authorities face.
Thank you. Councillor Tuck?
Sorry, just last one on the general spatial strategy. Residents of Cliddesdon are particularly keen that I ask, can they, if they've got to have something, could it be the land south of Hatch Warren? So there were two sites. There was Upper Swallock and there was land south of Hatch Warren, which was Clid 016. And the reasons that was the land south of Hatch Warren, which is just adjacent to the motorway, was rejected was the site projects distinctly into the countryside, doesn't relate well to neighbouring villages, significant site constraints, accessibility, highways, access, infrastructure, road noise, landscape, and its redevelopment would entail the loss of best and worst versatile agricultural land. But that Upper Swallock scores far worse on those same criteria and yet has found itself within the plan. And they feel that that damages their village setting and landscape far more than if we had chosen to allocate land south of Hatch Warren. So I really ask you if it's possible to go and look at that with I mean, obviously, they'd love you to take both sites out, but hearing the mood of the room, you know, could you look at the one that's been rejected? Because in their minds, it's incomplete, inconsistent application of the criteria.
We'll happily take a look at that again, but I'll Joe, I think you were. I just beat you to the button. I think you were going to explain the rationale for not including the CLID 016.
Yes, I mean, just in terms of, just to update you in terms of that, we did look at it through the site assessment. It's a smaller site, so it's actually promoted for 800, so the yield is significantly less. Even though it looks like quite a large site, a large proportion of the site, because of where it sits right next to the M3, is actually impacted heavily by noise, so you could only actually build on quite a small part of it. So there are issues with that. It's quite different from Upper Swallock, where we're looking at a garden village, which will be more self-sustaining. This would be a small site, and it's how then would that be a sustainable development? How would the people on that site, residents, be able to access facilities and things? So that's the sort of key difference between those two.
You're happy with that, Councillor Tuck? Nothing to extra?
Happy. Chair, you're pushing your luck.
Content to carry on. I've got Councillor Carr and then Councillor Slimon just after.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm conscious, of course, we need to get to sites. I had two specific questions on this. The first is a relatively simple one, picking up on the conversation about duty to cooperate conversations with Winchester. What duty of cooperation conversations have happened with West Berkshire thus far? Have those conversations taken place? Will they take place? I'm conscious that West Berkshire were one of the most sort of vociferous and clearest opponents of Watermill Bridge and indeed delivery along the Enbourne Valley, a river that's not talked about enough in this chamber. The second question relates to the report 4.20 and then also Appendix 5, 5.23, which is in relation to the settlement allocation proposed for St Marybourne of 25, which is an increase, of course, from 15, which I note is more than 35%, which you might imagine. My question really is what consideration has the administration, have officers given to the very significant pressures on the water table in St Marybourne and in relation to the sewerage and water infrastructure. We have had for years now, throughout the summer, throughout high periods of flooding, tankers up and down the Bourne Valley, sitting there for day and night, 24/7 often, pulling water out to keep the sewers from overflowing. You know, I looked through 5.23 of the appendix, and I don't see any acknowledgement of the stress and struggle that residents in St Marybourne have gone through as a result of the infrastructure constraints and the high water table and flooding environmental issues that that village faces. I recognise that St Marybourne, as a as community with facilities, will have an allocation, and I think the community was ready to accept 15 as a compromise between those facilities and those very significant environmental constraints. But I think there is a feeling of alarm that those day-to-day practical constraints of sewerage, of water table, haven't been considered. And I think my appeal would be, can we have consideration for St Marybourne to come back down to 15 in acknowledgement of those issues?
In terms of your first question about duty to cooperate, yes. So we have such meetings with all our neighbouring authorities. So we've also had those conversations with West Berkshire. They're aware of those two draft allocations, and we'll continue to discuss that with them. In terms of St Marybourne, you've seen, if you had the chance to look at Appendix 5, and there's quite a lot of sort of paperwork there, but that goes through why the numbers have been allocated in the way that they have, following a consistent methodology across all. It does pick up infrastructure constraints at an initial level, but the issues of water, as we've already talked about, will be dealt with in a lot more detail through the water cycle study, where it will look at things like impacts on aquifers, sewage treatment works and all of that, and pick up local issues as well. So we will be looking at that, and if that does come out as a particular restraint, we will need to address it.
I think it's fair to say, Chair, if I'm just allowed to quickly interject, that I'm not particularly popular amongst my Lib Dem colleagues in either Winchester or West Berkshire because of the some of the proposed allocations in this local plan. But going on a serious note, we are having regular conversations with all of the neighbouring authorities, not just about housing, but about other elements such as gypsy and traveller accommodation, for example, which is another important part of the plan. In terms of St Marybourne, I understand the concerns that you're raising. As Joe says, the water cycle study is, we are commissioning that for exactly this reason. What I would say though, the increase from 15 to 25, remember this is over a 17-year period, so we are looking at approximately half a unit per year, so I'm hoping it's not going to have a dramatic impact in terms of the extra building, or what it's going to have on the character or the water supplies and sewerage in St Marybourne.
Lovely. I've got two more on this, and then if anybody else wants to speak, particularly on this kind of area, before we move on to talking about like the actual allocations and the sites that have the sites that have gone out for allocation, and I'm going to ask the officers to go into some of that for us as well before we discuss it. Is anyone else on kind of this area of the report got anything to say? Lovely. Councillor Slimin.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tuck has just touched on the matter that I was going to cover on alternative sites that might have come forward and have been dismissed. And unless I've missed it, I can't see what the reasons for I believe there was about 70 sites put forward, and we've put 2 new ones forward. We've obviously added 2 that weren't in Reg 18 last time, which again, that's one thing. But where is the information about the other sites and why they weren't acceptable? Because it would be useful to compare whether some of those sites, former Councillor Rattigan, mentioned that there could be some smaller sites that might deliver some things that might be more suitable, but we don't know. It's quite difficult to scrutinise the decisions that we're going to make in a moment or two about which sites we're going to support or not support when we don't know what the alternatives are, because I would have thought, and I don't know what the numbers are if they add them all up, whether they come up to anywhere near the numbers that we require. And you know, I'm not against housing. In fact, as you know, I've been moving for council houses, and I would like to see us get more housing, but they've got to be in the right place and the right types of houses. But at the moment, I can't see how I can scrutinise something that I don't know about.
Yeah, lovely. I would jump in here, but there's no point because these notes have been written by Jenny, who will do it better for me.
They are set out in the agenda papers.
Yeah.
So, for example, I think page 242 gives you the Overton sites that have been assessed but not proposed for allocation. Then it goes on to look at Whitchurch and Bramley. So it's the last appendix of the document. So the details are in the papers. I think if there are specific sites that members wanted to talk about that have been promoted but have not been allocated,
yeah, we will circle right back to this. I just want to get through any other questions that aren't about site allocation, and then we'll cycle back round. So I've got Councillor Fox.
So can I clarify, Chair, that we're going to look at sites? If we are, then I'll reserve that.
Yeah.
And I've got another comment about Appendix 6, which is on education infrastructure. Shall I leave that until you do Appendix 6? Yeah, fine.
I think Councillor Chatburn.
I think this is the right place to ask the question. I thought somebody was going to be here as a member of the public from Little London, but the question that they were going to ask was, even though there's no housing allocation in the plans for Little London, there was a great surprise to find that there were a collection of houses with a nice pub in the middle of the countryside, but now they've been defined as a village with a settlement boundary. There are some errors on that settlement boundary in terms of it's included churches which don't exist, and it's included agricultural buildings that by definition shouldn't be within the settlement boundary. But I just wondered whether you could clarify, what is the intent on moving from being a collection of houses in the middle of the countryside to being defined as a settlement and a small village? What is the intent in doing that, and what is the implications, particularly in terms of planning applications and development in the countryside?
So Appendix 5, I think it is, of the paper goes through all the settlement studies and the methodology that's been used. So Little London has been included within that list now, within the settlement hierarchy, because it meets all of the sort of criteria that we set out. So to be consistent, there's no intent as such, but it's included in there as a consistent approach. The implications of that is that, as you said, even though it doesn't have a housing requirement, because it's taken development previously, so it's been credited for that, it's got a settlement policy boundary. So different policies apply within a settlement policy boundary to outside. So at a basic level, outside of that is basically considered to be countryside, where there's more restrictive policies. Inside the SPB, if it is suitable development, so it meets all other policies in the plan, that could be in principle acceptable. So it could, for example, allow some infill development and things like that, so small scale.
Lovely. I think, Jenny, if you don't mind just sort of talking us through some of the work you've done on site allocations, what the new 2 sites are, etc., between the 2 of you, that would be appreciated.
Okay, so from the site assessment perspective, those who've been involved in the planning process up to now would have seen that we undertake a very detailed site assessment approach. So we look at the details of those sites, probably over about 30 or so criteria, which look at all things from how deliverable a site is, what the impact is in terms of landscape, biodiversity, agricultural land quality, how it fits in with settlements, transport, how accessible they are. So it's a whole raft of things that we look at. And that process is done both internally in terms of technical officers, but also involving stakeholders and specialists, both at Hampshire County Council and other specialists. So, for example, we've done a detailed landscape sensitivity assessment by independent consultants that's fed into it a separate strategic flood risk assessment, which has looked at flooding issues, etc. So it's a very in-depth kind of technical process. Through that, so we've done that for all of the new sites that we put forward, so it's about 70 through the call for sites, nearly 80 actually, and we also had some new sites that were put forward through the last Reg 18 as well, so it's about 100 or so. We do filter out certain sites because we can't look at them all. I think we've got over 300 sites basically promoted to us, but we've looked at about 120 or so, I think, through that process. And through that, that's where we've come to the suggested allocations that we've got here. So there's the new ones that we've already spoken about in terms of Washwater, West End Farm at Mortimer, Upper Swallock as well. Also Redlands is one that's not been mentioned so far, which is 70 homes, an extension there towards the east of Basingstoke. And Skates Lane, obviously, has come back in, and some others that were shortlisted sites that we talked about in previous committees. So they had already gone through the site assessment process, and we discussed those, and at that point we didn't need the numbers, so they weren't included. So that's kind of led us to where we are.
Lovely, thank you so much. I'm sure Ken will be happy to hear about the 70 homes, small and medium developments. I think we've got Councillor Vox first. You had a couple of questions for this section.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the land at Whitmarsh Lane, which feels a bit like old Omo rebranding. Here we are with something better and brighter, but it's actually the same thing dressed in new clothing. The good old East of Basingstoke. I know that the speakers this evening have said this, and I've said it in multiple committee meetings in the council. East of Basingstoke is in our current local plan. It was supposed to be built, I think it was 2018, I could be wrong. It hasn't been,
It hasn't been built. The reason it hasn't been built isn't just because it's Hampshire County Council land, it's because developers don't want to build there because they know that it's not a great place to live, because it's a sewage works and an incinerator. And it is just not going to be a pleasant place to live. We have tacked on Lodge Farm to make it look nicer and better and bigger, and hopefully a developer will pick it up because it's got Lodge Farm there as well. That doesn't detract from the fact that East of Basingstoke is not a good site. And I do think that we have over-relied on it. We've got, let's be real, Redlands is being built and it's being sold. We've got developers champing at the bit to build nearly 400 houses at Sherwood Hill Farm, right next door to Redlands, a bit further away from the sewage works. Developers can sell those houses because they're not next to the sewage works. We need to be real. I'm not saying we shouldn't build 800 houses, but we do need to find a better place than right next to sewage works. It's not tenable there. So I appeal once again, I'm sure colleagues will do the same. Please rethink it. Lodge Farm, quite possibly, you're just about far enough away. Even bits of Lodge Farm are quite close to it. But it is not realistic. And we've relied on community facilities, primary schools, things being built on the East of Basingstoke that haven't happened. And all that's happened is those people that we've been having to send children to all sorts of different schools all over the place, bringing people across the A33 to community facilities that weren't built for the extra people. It's not worked. This is why it's important to me that we get the phasing right in this new plan, And then we really, really think about East of Basingstoke and our reliance on it. Because for me, history is spoken. You know, we've been waiting 5-7 years. It hasn't happened. I think all of the, it's got to be said again, there's a lot of new housing going up in this area, 2,190 homes coming up in this patch, and I've not included Bramley, I've not included stuff that's further south around there, just around the Chinham, Sheffield-on-Loddon patch, 2,190, right? If I look back not that far, you know, Sherford Park, Oran Green, Vine Park, Redlands, now called Longfield Place, all the rest of it, we will have, in addition to these that are coming up, already got 390 Cuffold Farm, blah, 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 4,342 houses in this area of the borough. Now, if it was Popham, you're building a secondary school, which is one of the things in Appendix 6 that I wanted to refer to. We haven't got that infrastructure in this part of the borough. It's not just about the GPs and the roads and, you know, the River Loddon. This is massive amount of housing. If it was anywhere else, if it was Popham or Many Down or whatever, we would have a proper major infrastructure plan for this part of the borough, and we don't have it. We're just piecemealing it all in and relying on East of Basingstoke, which doesn't happen. So you can see it's frustrating for the local population there, and I really would ask you to think again about this. If you want to put this volume of houses in this patch, we need to think more helicopter view about the infrastructure that goes with it, not just take it piecemeal. Thank you.
Deliverability point. As you said, East of Basingstoke has been under the ownership of Hampshire County Council for many years. They are now looking to dispose of the site, and they are going through that process. There are developers interested in it, and they're hoping to look at completing that before the end of the year. And Lodge Farm also has a developer attached to it, and they are promoting it.
Anything, Councillor Konechko, on the infrastructure point or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, and it's one of our frustrations too as a planning authority that we haven't, we as a borough, we haven't seen that infrastructure delivered that we desperately need. I have made a note of that. I will go and take that away, and we'll see what we can do.
If I could just come back on two little things there. The developers will be interested because Lodge Farm is attached to this now. It's not East of Basingstoke the developers want, it's Lodge Farm. My second bit is secondary schools. Really, I know it's not what we do, it's what Hampshire County Council do, but there just is no provision for secondary school. There is only a private school there. And we genuinely are moving children all over the place, outside of the borough, to get their education. It is really not acceptable. Thank you.
I'm happy to have those conversations with Hampshire County Council, so I agree.
Councillor Tuck.
Sorry, while we're on this subject of land next to sewage works and incinerator, it's the new name. Obviously, I agree with Councillor Vake's comments on the infrastructure angle. These sites should not be allocated. I do want to mention the vision on page 91. I just find it's a vision that lacks vision. I just don't, if we're going to have this, and I do think it's an appalling allocation, but seriously, we've got no architectural commentary on it at all. Other things I would want to see, old Basing, vernacular, really nice materials, and what we're probably going to get is a plastic-built development of the New England style. That's the slums of tomorrow, I'm afraid to say. It really is. I would really like us to, instead of having just, I appreciate someone has tried hard on the site, has the potential to become a place where we could be positive with surrounding and celebrate the River Loddon. But do you know what? If we're going to develop that site, I want full-scale chalk stream restoration. This should be ambitious, and you would expect me to say nothing less. I think we've really got to have, I can give you the words, happy to send them over to you rather than take up time in this committee. I'm also a bit worried that there's no concept or master plan of this combined site until we get to Reg 19, which I'm really concerned about. I'm also worried about the strategic gap for Old Basing, which is mentioned, but I couldn't find it other than the one that's been there between Basingstoke Town Centre and Basing. Actually, that's on that site. I do have something else about actually, it's a bit late. That's the next section. Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Can I come back to that? Is that okay? Yeah. So thank you very much, Kate. Very happy to receive your suggestions on making the vision more inspiring. What I would say, obviously, is that there are policies that sit behind this, which we did consult on Reg 18, but aren't currently putting forward before you this evening or before the public for Reg 18 around, which cover exactly the points you're making about rural character, about protecting the natural environment. But if you want to bring them in here, provided that they marry up with those policies, which, as you know, are quite tough, are do set high standards, then I've got no issues with including them in there. And sorry, I forgot the other point you made.
It was a strategic gap.
Strategic gaps, yes. So the strategic gap policy also sits within the other policies that we consulted on during Reg 18, but we can go back and take a look at that and make sure that it is suitable.
I'm sorry, and one last point, which was the same site, flooding and pollution, paragraph O, which is page 49 of 136, which is saying about the odour. You were looking to make air quality standards that are acceptable to the LPA can be met within homes. And I'm going, within homes? I mean, people need to be able to open their windows when it's 33 degrees outside, and that's when the sewage is the smelliest. And I've walked those public footpaths, and I know it smells on occasion. So I just feel that has got a typo and means can be met around homes. Do you see what I mean? It has to be...
Yeah. Noted.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Talking of sites that have been put next to sewage plants, I'm afraid I have to raise, on behalf of residents in my area, deep and profound alarm and concern about the proposal to allocate 500 homes at Oakley Farm. This has been something that I can tell you my email and my phone inbox been red hot over the last few days, because this has come as a real surprise and shock to residents. What I'd like to do is contextualise this slightly. I think it's very easy to see this as a single 500 home allocation and to contrast that to thousands of houses delivered around Basingstoke. But actually, when you look at it, and you must look at it from a cross-border perspective as a duty to cooperate borough, when you look at it in the context of Sandalford coming forward, 1,600 homes coming forwards in Newbury, Watermill Bridge coming forwards, 270 houses, and then this Oakley Farm proposal, 500 houses, actually, you are starting to look at around 2,000 houses in that corner of the world. The argument in favour of Oakley Farm is that it effectively will perform as the function as a suburb of Newbury. That's the argument, that's the rhetoric. Actually, when you think about the fact that all of the services, the shops, the community centres that folk put in the Oakley Farm allocation would access are in Newbury, they would have to fight through 2,000 homes worth of new traffic up the narrow A343. So I think the borough needs to think very carefully about whether that is a realistic proposition, given the infrastructure constraints, and those conversations with West Berkshire are therefore critical to getting that right. I want to talk also about that basic point about whether this site is going to actually help you deliver this plan. There are 2 outstanding planning inspector appeals where land at Oakley Farm has been judged to be unsuitable for residential development. Those 2 appeal decisions in 2022 and 2024. It is, I think, concerning to me that we're proposing to put 500 houses on a site that the inspector themselves have deep concerns about. So I wonder, actually, can this site really be a solution to the local plan housing demand that you have here? And I think while that question is there, the integrity of the plan potentially is at risk, and that needs to be sufficiently answered. The other point I want to talk about is schools. The issues with having a very large development literally on the boundary, are significant. And of course you have this council, you have West Berkshire, and you have Hampshire County Council, who all need, with their different priorities, to get aligned for this allocation to succeed. In truth, Wootton Hills School is planning for a reduction in pupils, but now they're having to work out where do pupils from Watermill Bridge go. And so the schools are quite alarmed about what will happen if Oakley comes forwards. Because West Berkshire, and we've had this conversation through Watermill Bridge, West Berkshire don't want those new pupils going north. They are not planning for new pupils from Hampshire to go into Newbury. So again, that point about it performing as a suburb of Newbury does seem very flawed. The assumption automatically from the county and from West Berkshire will be that any new houses delivered at Oakley will have to have their children educated in Hampshire. The Clear School in Berkeley is not prepared for that, and it is extremely unlikely they will be able to prepare for that without significant investment, the kind that we haven't even thought about. And then the Wootton Hill schools, we've mentioned a similar issue with GP services. Again, the Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB, the medical folk, will be assuming in the initial period looking at this that medical provision will be provided in the Hampshire ICB area. But in truth, the argument in favour of this development allocation is that folk will get their services in West Berkshire. If it's really clear in these examples that the services we've just been discussing actually can't realistically be accessed in Newbury without some difficulties and constraints, I think we have to look seriously about the credibility of this allocation. And the final point, I may come back, I'm conscious others have sites they want to talk about. The final point I want to talk about is that question of constraints. If the Borough Council decide to move forwards with this allocation, which I would implore you not to, but if you do, I don't think 500 homes is achievable. I really don't. What's not quite acknowledged is that in that part of the world, the A34 is a raised bank. And so noise will carry straight over and will impact residents in the southern part of that allocation. Then, of course, you have the River Enbourne with the various water constraints coming forwards, and then slap bang in the middle of the site. We've talked about it, other colleagues have talked about it, a sewerage site. The sewerage site for South, Newbury and Northern Hampshire. Hampshire County Council's Waste and Minerals Plan is very clear that that site needs to be expanded to meet capacity. There is no evidence in the materials presented that we've considered the constraints of that. There is some vague reference to an odour management plan, but what does that mean? Does that mean some enormous fan that will rotate around the site depending on the wind? Let's be realistic about the constraints here. I don't think this site is credible, but if, against that advice, you pursue it, 500 homes is not going to work.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Sam. Yes, I think once again this demonstrates the challenge of trying to compile a local plan. We've had two councillors make very similar arguments about schooling, about overdevelopment in specific areas, about smell and sewerage access in two very different parts of the borough. The reality is that we have been given a housing number that we need to meet. If we don't meet that housing number, we lose. We don't have a huge amount of power as a local planning authority at the moment in terms of setting our local plan. Whatever powers we do have, we will lose if we do not make this local plan. So yes, we are having to make very difficult choices. I made that point right at the start in my introduction. But I am sure that as this conversation develops, there will be other sites that I'll be asked to exclude. And we just cannot do that. We are, I'll be completely frank with you, we are picking sites that are perhaps the least worst in many cases here. That's the reality that we face. It's not what I particularly signed up as portfolio holder to do. I'm sure people in this room are not particularly impressed with some of these choices. But the point is, we need to build these extra new homes. We've done the objective analysis, and these sites come up as the least worst. We're going to have to pick them. I absolutely understand the concerns. I'm not trying to dismiss the points you've raised, Sam, about the amount of development in that area in total, about the challenges we have with schools, about some of the issues with sewage. But I don't think there are very many sites in here that any of us would describe as perfect. All of them have their issues, and it is just a case of making sure that we pick the ones that are going to be as good as they can be from the list of sites that we have.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. The main word to describe this entire report is inconsistent. There are sites being brought forward for seemingly arbitrary reasons that we're using to then refuse other sites in the same document. The logic and the rationale to bring one site forward is being used to refuse another site on the opposite side of the borough. It's just confusing. An example, we've got HP 008 Faulknersdown Farm near Andover. It's not recommended for being brought forward due to odour and noise considerations. And then, as mentioned by my colleagues to my right and left, you've got the land east of Basingstoke being brought forward despite arguably much more serious noise and odour concerns. So it just seems a little bit peculiar. You've got the Tadley sites are being brought forward despite being outside of the settlement policy boundary, and then the Overton sites are in the same boat outside of the policy boundary, and that's listed as one of the reasons they're not being brought forward. I would basically like an idea of the weighting being given to the different considerations to sort of understand and be able to explain when we field inevitable questions about this, why certain sites are being brought forward seemingly arbitrarily. I have another concern as well. I mean, I have many, but another concern I'll mention now is that we're tying our own hands. Assuming the local government reorg actually goes ahead, we as a new authority will in theory have the power to make many of the decisions currently being made by Hampshire County Council as part of this strategy, but we won't have the flexibility to bring forward potentially more sensible sites which have been rejected due to current limitations around transport and infrastructure, but we'll have control over many types of infrastructure once we're a unitary. So some of those site options will potentially feel a lot more sensible at that stage. So I'm concerned that we're looking at this in a very short-sighted manner, that we're doing something now because we have to, and then in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years' time, we'll turn around and go, oh, those idiots 5 years ago, who thought that was a good idea? Except it's us, we're the idiots right here, right now, making this decision and bringing forward terrible options, or as Andy put it, you know, the least bad options. But they're only the least bad options under this framework. Once we have that authority and power, we can, or could, have potentially brought forward much better options using our new powers. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts around that. I might come back on some other bits as well.
Thank you. If I pick up the second point, firstly about the local government reorganisation, then I'll leave it to officers to discuss some of the different criteria and relative weightings. So where we are, we've got the government deadline of December 2026, by which time we need to submit our plan to a planning inspector for examination. We don't know what happens after December 2026. We've written to government, we've asked them, we've just been told that there will be a new regime after that. Given the mood music coming from central government, I think it's fairly safe to say, and certainly the view within the planning industry is that the new regime will have less local input. So, as I said right at the start in my introduction, I think it's not worth us taking the risk. I certainly, as portfolio holder, could not take that risk on behalf of residents and say, well, let's see what happens if the deadline slips. I don't think that's viable for us. So we do have to press ahead with this, whether we like to or not. What happens post local government reorganisation in terms of the local plan, again, has not yet been clarified by government. I don't think they thought that far ahead. What it does mean, though, is that whatever new unitary structure we end up being part of, we will have a valid, up-to-date local plan. And that gives us protection, and it gives us quite a strong say with any other local authorities that we are brought together with. And that, I think, is a good place to be. You are right in saying that we will have to, at some point, review the local plan. We would have to anyway within 5 years. That's the statutory time period at which local plans have to be reviewed. It may be that because of local government reorganisation, that is brought forward. So I think at some point in the next few years, because of local government reorganisation, we will be having to review this plan. So you can argue, well, why are we doing it now? Isn't it a bit of a waste of the time? You know, and if that's an argument you want to make, I will listen. But the reality is, we've got this December 2026 deadline, and we cannot afford to miss it. So even if that means we then have to review these things again, and we're all back here in 2 or 3 years' time, it's absolutely the right thing, in my view, to make sure that we crack on with this. And it may be that we change those allocations subsequently. The point you made about the inconsistencies, I think it's difficult because there are a number of different reasons. Odour is one of the reasons that's mentioned in the Falkner's Down farm, and why that wasn't proceeded. However, it's not the only reason. There are numerous other things. We have to look at it in the round. But I think it's probably on that point, it's probably worth me handing over to the experts who are better to explain a little bit more about how the process actually works.
So as I explained before, we look at a whole raft of criteria, so about 30 or so, and we don't give them numerical scores, but some are potentially more important than others, depending on national guidance, for example. So odour, taking that as an example, there could be sites where the whole site is immediately next to a sewer treatment works, say, and it's all affected by odour, and therefore because of its scale, you can't develop on it because it's all affected. Whereas others, like east of Basingstoke, the site is large enough that you can mitigate that effect. So even though it's affected by it, you can mitigate that. So there's lots of factors that come into it. That's maybe an issue for debate, but from a technical perspective, that's the view that's been taken for the plan. Flooding, for example, the same. If there's flooding issues that can be mitigated, so that will be raised as an issue, but that might not be an issue that throws it out completely. So it depends on the site, and it's a balance across all of those different criteria. That may not come across in the summaries, potentially, and that you've highlighted, but that's the process.
Thank you for both of those explanations. So just for absolute clarity, any given officer on any given day would have come to the exact same conclusions about the sites brought forward. There is a framework, it is robust, and there is absolutely no judgment call or gut decision being made based on the weightings, based on considerations. Is that right? Or has there been potentially varied input, and we might be looking at a completely different spatial strategy if, you know, somebody had woken up on the other side of the bed when they wrote it?
So I think in terms of answering that, that is a question I've also raised with officers when we first started developing this plan. Well, first started last year's plan. And what gave me the confidence was that as part of the integrated impact assessment that is currently being produced and will be published as part of Regulation 18, independent experts review the rankings. They look at how we've weighted it. They look at essentially the league table that officers come up with. And if they don't believe that it's been done in a way that is objective, if they don't believe that it's been done in a way that will meet the planning rules, they will tell us so. So if this report comes back, which I hope it will, and says that it is legitimate, it is defendable, then I'm happy. If obviously it goes back and says, you know, I can't quite see why you've excluded this site and included this one, then that's something we will need to look at again, because if it doesn't get through the scrutiny of that independent report, then it's very unlikely to be able to convince an inspector.
I, for one, think we've probably got some of the most competent officers around, and I'm sure they've done a fantastic job. And I don't think any of the others would have done any worse just because they are already experts in the field. Councillor Chapman.
Thanks, Chair. I'm guessing, but I think the report you're talking about is what probably in 2022 was called the Woods spreadsheet, yeah, with 33 parameters against every single site. So you could see the red, green, amber, and the ranking and rating, so that you can make that direct comparison. So thinking about my ward particularly, I could understand the logic and the thinking between the proposals for Wigmore Farm and Wakeford Farm, which have been rejected, but I haven't seen much information, I haven't seen any information on why they've been rejected. So that report you're talking about was available in 2022 for this committee in terms of scrutiny, but it's not available within this documentation. Yes, the information's there, but it's verbal. It's not site-by-site comparison like was being talked about there. So those things that make quick, well, not quick and easy, but more rational, objective comparisons, they're made much more readily, yeah, and they don't exist in this one. So the report you're talking about is coming and is scrutinised by people outside. I would welcome and value that being presented to this committee to be able to do that scrutiny properly. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what Councillor Chapman was saying was the 450-page document in front of us isn't quite big enough yet.
That's exactly what Andy said when I asked for it.
Has anyone got anything on Appendix 5 or Appendix 6 that they'd like to raise at this point? Anyone? Councillor Slimin, and then...
I think I did put my hand up, but as usual, nobody ever seemed to see me. I would certainly say that I feel very much like deja vu. Many of you may remember that I was on the equivalent to this committee in 2023, September 23, where we had 2 meetings to discuss this. And at the time, I argued that Skates Lane should not be included. And in fact, Skates Lane was actually removed from the Reg 18. So it's quite difficult now to understand why it's been put back in, because it never went out for consultation under Reg 18. And so nobody could have commented on it, because I'm absolutely sure that nobody in my area would have asked for it to be put back in again, because most of my residents that I speak to do not believe that this is a good site. And neither do I, because as I've already mentioned, I don't believe it's deliverable. I don't believe that the road is going to be open. It's got very many other issues, which I'm not going to rehearse again, because you've heard Rob actually mention the covenant and all the other things going on. But quite honestly, I do believe that this has been just put back in, and it doesn't seem that there's much added information as to why it's back in, because to me it looks very similar to the report that went to the committee in 2023, which I argued shouldn't be in the next Reg 18, and which was accepted at the time. So we're back 2 years later, and it's now going to back in. Now, I understand it's difficult at the moment, and I do understand that we have to get a local plan in place. I am not arguing that every single site on the local plan needs to be removed. But if they're not deliverable, what is the point of putting them in? Because when it comes to planning inspector, if it gets that far and it's still in there, I'm pretty sure that there will be an awful lot of opposition. At Reg 18, there'll be an awful lot of opposition, I can promise you. At Reg 19, there'll be even more opposition if it continues to be in. And if it goes to planning inquiry, there'll be even more, which means that it's making a total nonsense of actually putting a site in that is not suitable for all sorts of reasons. Now, at the beginning of the paper, there were loads of comments about the policies that we've adopted. And I read that paper, and I apologise I asked the question earlier. I've been in bed all week, not very well, unfortunately. So I only got the papers in the middle of Tuesday afternoon, and I wasn't able to read them till yesterday. But at the moment, we're in a situation where we don't know whether there's other sites that we could put forward because we can't see a comparison. But we know there are so many objections made to this particular site that I do believe that we ought to have, so that the public transparency is why this site is approved amongst all the others, because our residents are going to ask us that. And if you think it's just the odd resident, you ought to go into Sainsbury's and shop and be a councillor and find out how many people approach you and ask you the questions, how many people in the street you get asked for. And it isn't just people living in the Tadley and Pamber ward, but in the rest of Tadley as well, who ask these same questions. And I want to be able to justify to them why this site is still in when so many people believe it's not correct. When the policies you read are really, really strong. And I read that part of the paper and agreed with everything that was in there, the reasons, the things that we should be looking at, the policies that we should be adopting. And then I read that it was still back in. And I'm thinking, but it doesn't conform, in my view, to the policies that we've already agreed. Biodiversity, ecological impact, etc., etc. There are so many things that are against this particular site. And I cannot take away my feeling that this site is totally unsuitable. I know that we can't talk about the planning application, which is the PIP, which has sat on the shelf for about 18 months and not moved anywhere. The question is, would somebody kindly look at all the comments made by the statutory authorities there to see what the statutory authorities are saying about this application? Because I don't believe that when it comes to planning, it's going to get through. And so I just don't see the point in having it there. I'm going to rest my case there because you've heard this argument before and you will hear it again. And I'm absolutely no doubt that you will hear it at Reg 18, if it's included, that there'll be 500 and odd people at the minimum and maybe thousands of people commenting on the inclusion on this site.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm glad you're feeling well enough to be able to join us this evening. You make a number of good points, so I'll take each of them in turn. Firstly, why has Skates Lane been included? As you know, it was a borderline site before. It was in, then we were able to take it out, and now we've had to put it back in. The reason it's back in is not because anything necessarily has changed on site, but because we've got to build more houses. We've got a higher housing number, and therefore the bar, if you want to think of it that way, at which sites start being allowed in, has had to get lower. It's as simple as that. It was very close to the bar before. The bar's had to drop because of the higher housing number, and therefore it now makes a grade. Exactly the same with Upper Swallock. Nothing necessarily has changed dramatically on the site, but what is different now is that we need to build more houses. In terms of public opposition and at Reg 18, that's exactly what public consultation is all about. We want to hear the comments of residents. As you know, though, it's not necessarily about the volume of responses. It's about whether they can come up with strong planning arguments. Sadly, this isn't a popularity contest. It is based on demonstrating that there are good reasons why this site ought to be rejected. I think it's also really important. You mentioned talking to statutory consultees about the planning application. I think I'll make the point again that I made earlier. It's really important to distinguish between the site allocation here and the specific planning application that's going in. Yes, there may be highway objections to the current planning application, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they couldn't be mitigated if the highways are located somewhere else on the site. So I think we've got to be careful not to conflate the two.
I think running the local plan work, if it was a popularity contest, Andy, you'd be losing. Councillor Slimon, anything to come back on that at all?
No, thank you, Andy. I do appreciate that it is very difficult. And I certainly was very pleased to read the initial paperwork and say that I agreed with everything. I understand why we need housing. But I'm also very concerned that we're actually going to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater in due course. And I'm sure that most people in my area would support that. I understand that Reg 18 will actually be open from January 26 if things move along as it is. next January, Reg 18?
I'm hoping it will be November, December 2025.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise.
If I'm not just throwing the officers under a bus there.
You just put them under even more cosh. I thought it was January 26th. Well, obviously, everybody will be waiting, and I'm sure there'll be loads of people who will have everything they want to say at that point. But in the meantime, I think that there are huge opposition to this particular site, which is not NIMBYism, by the way. It is not NIMBYism at all. So please don't accuse anybody of that. Tadley has taken its fair share of houses. I don't think people realise that we started in 1950s with about 250 homes. Because of AWE, we built loads and loads of houses around the site. We then built more and more houses because it was easy to throw them at the site, at the area. And the whole of Tadley, which includes Pamber, built-up Pamber and built-up Borkhurst, is now included in one settlement boundary. There is nowhere really to build in Tadley, even if we were allowed to build. There are one or two sites I would personally have thought we could do, but there are minor sites compared to what we're talking about. But the difficulty is that we've got a major conurbation next door to AWE. It's not of our making, it's not of our wanting, and people say, well, why doesn't Tadley take more? I mean, it's not the want of wanting, but of course we have to be careful that we are protecting our residents, that we are protecting the emergency plan, which is in place. As an emergency planner, I know how important that is. I was involved in Buntsfield, which is where this DEPZ all came from, because if something happens at that site, many people might physically have issues if they don't just die, but they're, you know, and I'm not talking about nuclear bombs going off, I'm talking about other issues that could happen. So it is important that we get this right, not that we just dismiss it and say it's fine to put a new community of 240 odd houses in a greenfield site that is miles away from anywhere, that is probably not going to have access to the main road. It's not sustainable because it's more than 500 metres from the bus stop. That the people can't cycle and whatever is going to be more car dependent. There are so many good reasons why this site is not sustainable under our current policies, which are being applied to other planning applications that are coming forward already within the rural community of Pamber. And yet this all of a sudden has been dismissed as being not relevant to this site. So
Well, thank you,
I'm
Councillor Tuck.
concerned.
I think that's heard. Councillor Slimman, I think that's heard. Can we get Councillor Tuck?
Right, Chair, you might tell me I'm leaping ahead, but I'm looking at page 271, Appendix 1, tables summarising outcomes of assessment for promoted sites. Is that okay to mention? Basically, I'm just a bit confused by the heading for this. It's sites promoted for housing in or around Basingstoke or of sufficient scale stroke location to deliver a new settlement. And then you've got things, and my ask is for a format change. Can we have, if it's a separate settlement, could that be just shown as a separate table? Because I've got anomalies like old 007 Hodds Farm, where you do say, oh, MB, this has been listed under sites at Basingstoke due to its strategic scale, but it adjoins Old Basing. And then on page 285, you say the same thing again. Sites promoted in and around Old Basing, but we've included Hodds Farm, even though actually it's in Basingstoke, well, even though it does adjoin Old Basing. And it's just like, oh my God, this is so confusing. Can we just admits adjoins Old Basing and remove it from around Basingstoke, please?
You want to come back there at all? You're all good? No, lovely. Noted as a comment. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Broadening out, there's a point I'd like to make which touches upon quite a number of sites, and that's the question of strategic gaps. In the paperwork, we frequently refer to a desire, a policy ambition to make strategic gaps meaningful. And I'm concerned that we're not necessarily putting any teeth behind that other than an aspiration. So we have a strategic gap between Stroud St John and Basingstoke at the moment, but there's a proposal to allocate 2 sites, I think it's Weybrook and Marnell Park, which therefore takes some land out of the strategic gap. We're then later on relying on a strategic gap to keep Many Down, North and South separate from Oakley. And I should think lots of people in Oakley find the promise of a strategic gap the one reassuring, friendly bit of that, westward expansion of Basingstoke. I think they're relying on that to give them their settlement separation. But if we are at one point in the plan undermining the strategic gap as far as I can see it, and then at the same time saying that we must have a meaningful strategic gap between Many Down and Oakley, I'm wondering how the team propose to make that strategic gap truly meaningful. I mean, how are we going to make sure that that is a meaningful way of preventing coalescence going for the very, very foreseeable future? And there's a similar point when it comes to strategic gaps, and this is where there isn't even an attempt to install one. I think between the proposed allocation at Popham and the folk at North Waltham, I don't think I saw a strategic gap proposed there. I think perhaps there ought to be one. I think similarly, there doesn't seem to be any attempt to plan for a strategic gap between what would be the southern end of Popham and what is a potential enforced top-down allocation of a Mitchell Devon new town. That's not something I would support, actually. I'll just be really clear about that. But I'm concerned that there is no current thinking in the papers about how you would prevent that ribbon and coalescence all the way up the M3 from what that station site could look like through Popham, through the southwest of Basingstoke, and then across to Oakley. I think we should have strategic gaps in some of those missing places, and then how are we actually going to make them meaningful? And part of that perhaps is about land ownership. If we're thinking, does the Borough Council have a very clear view about who owns the land in those strategic gaps? And where we perhaps have more influence is in relation to the gap between Many Down and Oakley, where we are obviously a very key player in that. Do we have very clear cast iron, legal or other reassurances that we're not going to see any kind of attempt to fill that gap between Many Down and Oakley? Apologies.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Sam. I'm very happy to explore that further with officers. We do believe in the value of strategic gaps. We do have, not in the spatial strategy policies, but in the other policies, we do have a strategic gap policy, and that is something that we will maintain going forward. So I think it's just making sure that those two marry up, so we can look into that.
Councillor Dillo.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to go to SPS 2A, obviously the Buckskin and Southam neighbourhood renewal on page 52. Unlike sort of Many Down, there's an actual number. I know I mentioned it earlier, but in here it doesn't give a number. The only thing it says is that there's currently 4,600 homes across the 2 estates, and then obviously now there's a real pressure to deliver 1,000 extra homes possibly in this area. So
page number check where you're at.
Yep, sorry, it's SPS, so page 7 of 136 of Appendix 2.
Page 52.
Page 52, 53. Yeah. So my concern is obviously without an actual number for this area, for the whole renewal area, that will sort of could leave scope for significant intensification later and increased density, which these areas are already very densely populated with homes and communities, so that is a real concern for me. So I'd like to comment on that. And then also policy SBS 5.2, which is the land north of Pack Lane. That's page 27. This is marked down, actually it has a figure, 300 homes. Now, looking at this area, there seems to be so many constraints for this area. I just wonder whether it'll ever be built out. It's sort of south of the railway. There's the Five Ways junction. Where there's so many constraints. I'm just wondering why this is even in there. It's part of sort of Many Down North, but then now it's been put with Many Down South, I believe. But I'm just wondering, the Oakley Road, Five Ways junction, they're at capacity. So this area is beholden on significant infrastructure, isn't it, before it can even be looked at. I don't know, maybe we should put the reallocation of the golf course there.
Anyone want to come back on any of that, or just taking that away?
So just in terms of the first point around the house numbers in Buckskin, South Ham, as we've already discussed, that there is a number at the moment. If you look at the main overarching policy for the renewal areas, you'll see that it's 1,000 across Buckskin, South Ham, Winklebury, and I think is Popley Northern is the fourth one in there. And Popley's in there as well. So it's the 1,000 across those. As we've discussed already tonight, there isn't more detail behind it, and the allocation between those will be developed potentially in parallel with the documents over the next few months and years. In terms of the land north of Pack Lane, that is envisaged as part of Northern Many Down, Joe's got a bit more, some additional details there, so I'll leave that with her.
Just in terms of Pack Lane site, that's allocated in the adopted local plan already, so the principle of developing that site is already established. We've just put it as a separate allocation because the outline permission for the rest of Many Down does not apply to that site, so it's just been pulled out as its own allocation, that's all.
Lovely. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd made a few notes before the meeting, and actually a lot of them don't feel quite as relevant now, but I'll read them anyway. No, I've got a lot of sympathy for the Cabinet and for officers, because this whole discussion has really highlighted how crap our entire system is in this country. We're at the mercy of the central government and of developers. We've got sites being brought forward based on what developers want to develop. We don't have much control over that, so we end up with the worst options for everybody except the few people that are going to make some money from it. A lot of these sites are clearly deeply unpopular with residents. And there's not a lot we can do about that. That being said, and here's my slightly critical part, this strategy isn't simply a response to a terrible government imposing a huge increase in housing numbers. It isn't ambitious, well thought out, creative, or adequate. The only word I can think of to describe it is craven. It is an absolutely lazy, apathetic betrayal of almost every person in the borough. There is no vision, no evidence that this council or administration actually wants to do things differently, blaze a new trail, or deliver something unprecedented. It's simply a continuation of the same politics which has existed for my entire life, whereby the whinging arrogance of developers is used as the basis for an unpopular compromise at the expense of the future. It may be easier to sell this strategy to members of the public if we simply acknowledge the fact that sites have been brought forward using a framework written by Edward Lear, famous for his nonsense books, for those that don't know. I'd urge the Cabinet to rethink yet another prosaic, pusillanimous, miserable attempt at planning for the future of this borough. We've suffered decades of that. We're long overdue for some councillors with some temerity who display even a sliver of inspiration and have the courage to say no more. And I know it's not the councillors' fault, so that does seem, in hindsight, having written that earlier today, quite harsh. However, I'm just so cross on behalf of all the residents that are going to suffer because of this. It's dreadful, and I mean that because I actually dread to see what this borough will look like in 30 years' time.
Lovely, thank you. Do you need to immediately come back? Do you have anything there?
I think I probably should respond to comments like that. So I agree with the first part of what you said in terms of, you know, the system isn't fit for purpose. It is developer-led. It has a veneer of localism about it, but the reality is that a lot of the rules are set nationally. I disagree very strongly with the second part of your statement. I think this is probably the best possible plan we can create in the circumstances, and I would stress, not least because I've got two officers sat next to me, that it's involved a huge amount of hard work from dozens of people, not just in the planning team, but across numerous departments within the council. And I value their work, and I'm sure we all do as a committee. The reality is that we have to abide by the rules. If we don't come up with a plan that is going to meet the criteria that an inspector is going to assess us on, we will not have a valid plan. It will get sent back. It may take a few days to fix. It could potentially take a few months to fix. Throughout that whole time, speculative development continues because we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, and we also have that December 2026 cliff edge. It is a very difficult situation, I won't deny that, but I generally say that this is the best possible response we can given the circumstances. I think I used the phrase in my introduction that we've been dealt a poor hand by the planning system. We are playing that hand as best we can.
Anything to respond there, Mike?
Credit where it's due, I do trust Andy when he says that, because I have a lot of respect for him. He's very intelligent and good at what he does. So, sorry for the previous harsh remarks. I take what you said at face value, and I trust that it is entirely accurate.
Just a couple of comments for myself. I think in rooms like this, on evenings like this, where my board colleagues have their own residents to represent, and I obviously have my own, but also a job to do across the whole borough as committee members, and with so many public speakers who have come in to talk about mostly against various projects they don't think should be allocated across the local plan. I think it's important to remember the voices in the room that often aren't here. Luckily, my ward in Winkelbury and Manydown did vote somebody in who can now be in the room and is here, and that's someone like myself who is a young person living in this borough, is the young person living in this borough whose family has relied on social housing, who have been on the housing register. And there was an awful lot of people who, sure, might disagree with a lot of these site allocations, but I think it's a really great thing that we've got these site allocations, that we're going to move towards building houses, because there are a bunch of residents who don't hear the voices of at this council, who need a place to live, who are waiting on that housing register, or can't afford to leave their parents, like myself. I can't afford to move out of my house, because the rents in Basingstoke are too high for anywhere that's commutable, and to be able to buy is a pipe dream for anyone my age. So I think it's really important that we keep that in context. We've got young people living in this community. It isn't just the people who have lived here their whole lives. There are their children, their grandchildren. We've got people who want to bring their families here, and why shouldn't we let them? It's a fantastic place to raise a family, and we want their talent here to be employed in the jobs that we want here, so we can have a thriving economy. So I think it's just important to note that some of the voices that aren't in the room are still important, and we should be considering them as a committee. Anybody else before we wrap up? Did you have your hand up, Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, just to try and put some of those comments in context of what's happening on a national basis. How many councils are actually going to the ministry saying, after having had a call for sites, are going to the ministry and saying, we actually can't deliver these. We can't deliver these numbers. How many councils are doing that? And out of the, I think there's about 320 LPAs. The last count I did was it's over 100 that are sitting in a similar position to us, where we've got a housing delivery test figure of something like 75-80%. And so That's a third of the country is desperately, like us, trying to allocate sites that we really don't want to allocate. So I think it's just worthwhile perhaps finishing the evening on thinking at that high level of what we're trying to address. Thank you.
If there's no other, Councillor Tuck.
Just because you're wrapping up, I've got some detailed comments on Old Basing's assessment on page 360, 361, but I can email those to you. I just want that as a matter of record here. We don't mention our bridges or river.
Councillor Vox.
Thanks, Chair. Just following up from your own comments, I think one of the things that I found deeply frustrating as a councillor is trying to get social housing allocations within developers' planning applications. The number of times we've been advised, pushed, whatever the right word is, that it's unaffordable, uneconomic to put social housing into a housing development, and they've paid us money instead. Deeply frustrating. Tried so hard to fight against that, because we do need mixed communities so that we can have people from all parts of our society living together. You know, what I dread is that we find ourselves forced into having housing developments that are 100% social affordable housing. We need social affordable housing, but we need to have it at 40%, 45% even. But we need mixed communities because we all need to be together, living together. So whilst I absolutely support what you're saying, I absolutely agree we need it, getting developers to build them is a different kettle of fish.
Any other comments that anyone would like to raise at the stage? Councillor Carr.
Yeah, it's just a very brief concluding comment, really, which is to say, you know, obviously there is a great deal of frustration in the room, and some of that frustration, I'm sure, has been perhaps has been felt quite harshly by officers and by the cabinet member, and you know, it's not meant personally. Sometimes I've been on that side of the table as a cabinet member. I've had tough scrutiny, and I know it can be quite something to go through. So you have my sympathies on that personal thing. We absolutely, Chair, we need the right homes in the right places and in the right numbers and in the right social mix as well. And none of the decisions that will be made in the coming weeks and months are going to be easy, because unfortunately we are not acting autonomously. We're not acting wholly independently. We're acting very much under tight structures, top-down targets that have been imposed from Whitehall, and that's unfortunate. And we spent, I think, the first 2 years of my time on this council, from say 21 onwards, talking about the number. That debate, unfortunately, is closed, and we are where we are. So all of us, I think, will continue to stand up for our own residents and ensure that the right allocations are taken out and the right allocations put in. But on a personal level, I do recognise the difficult emotional toll that some of this might take, actually.
Thank you. I think what I'm not going to try and do is summarise everything that we've heard over the last 3 hours, because there was just absolutely no way. Jenny's taken very comprehensive notes. I think Kevin's got some notes as well. What I would also, give me a moment, let me finish. And I'll let you talk, Andy, I'll let you talk. So I won't summarise everything. I think if there is anything that's come up in this meeting, or that particularly if you've heard things from the public that you'd like to make sure we really do pick up on and make sure the cabinet get, I think let's try and make sure that things go in writing. I'm going to encourage speakers to do the same and have done earlier, and so that the cabinet get everything they need to do when they're making their decision. And thank you so much for your time, Councillor Konechko, do you?
Yeah, sorry, I won't keep anyone because I'm conscious it's coming up to 9:30, but just a big thank you to everybody, so to the guest speakers, particularly those who have stayed around afterwards as well to listen to the whole debate, and also to my fellow councillors. The scrutiny has been robust, but I don't think it's ever crossed the line, so thank you for your sympathy, Sam, but it is part of the job, and actually I think it's been a good, helpful, constructive discussion. Just to echo what the chair said, please do send us, if you've got any additional comments, please do send us send them to us. I think probably by the middle of next week would be ideal. I appreciate that's quite a tight time scale, but as we've discussed, we've got this big deadline, this cliff edge in December 26th that we can't afford to miss. So I will leave it there. Thank you for your scrutiny, and thank you for making it actually an enjoyable, useful discussion.
Thank you, Andy. Is there anything that anybody would like to flag for the work programme? And if so, I will also tell you can flag it, but you need to do an online form as well. He's done it. Councillor Chapman has done so we'll pick this up at the next meeting. I believe that is everything. Thank you so much, guys. And I told you I'd get it done at 9:30. 9:30 on the dot.